Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something a little darker, a little colder, and a whole lot hungrier than usual. You're going to step into the wool-wrapped boots of people who stared down a merciless winter with empty shelves and growling bellies. This isn't cozy fireside stuff. We're talking about the real deal, when the snow piles high, the food runs out, and the choices get weird, fast. You'll see people survive on bark, rodents, soup made from boiled belts, and yeah, you probably won't survive this. But hey, it makes for a great story. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. No pressure. Also, drop your city and the time you're watching in the comments, just to see who else is out here wandering history with us in the middle of the night. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes and you're staring at the rafters of a cabin ceiling. Not the charming kind with hot cocoa on the stove. No, this one's drafty, sagging, and so cold your breath fogs in the air before disappearing. The fire's down to embers. You're wrapped in every blanket you own, but your toes still hurt. Not from the cold itself anymore, but from the numbness. That weird, aching numbness that feels more dangerous than pain. You're hungry. Not missed lunch. Hungry. Your stomach feels like it's trying to digest itself. There's no breakfast. There wasn't dinner last night. There wasn't anything the day before that either. You chewed on a piece of dried bark like it was gum, just to trick your jaw into pretending it was eating. Didn't help much. You shuffle over to the pantry. The door creaks open like it's apologising. A few dusty jars. One with a black mould fuzz colony thriving on old jam. One with a half-pickled onion floating like a shrunken head. A tin can with no label. You shake it. Feels like maybe peas, or maybe rocks. Outside it snowed again. Of course it has. The drifts reach halfway up the windows, sealing you in. A few rabbit tracks dart across the white surface before vanishing near the trees. No birdsong, no movement. Just the steady hum of wind and the occasional crack of ice breaking off the roof. You think about your options. You've got 2 matches left. 1 log, a pot. No meat, no vegetables, and certainly no bread. But people have survived this before, right? History is full of cold winters and colder kitchens. You remember stories, ones your grandmother told you, not fairy tales. Real ones. About how a mother boiled shoe leather just to give the kids something to chew. About neighbours trading a single potato for half a bar of soap. About people eating things they never, ever talked about again. This is that kind of winter. You wrap yourself tighter and settle in near the fire pit. The embers spit at you like tired old men. You toss in a scrap of dry birch bark, precious stuff now worth more than gold, and nurse a tiny flame back to life. Just enough for warmth. Maybe you can melt snow for water. Maybe. The door rattles in its hinges, just the wind. You try not to hope, but you always hope, that someone will knock, that someone will bring food, that someone made it through the forest. The storm, the impossible, they never do. You remember reading about the year without a summer, 1816. That wasn't just some poetic name. After Mount Tambora exploded in Indonesia, ash spread across the globe. Crops failed in Europe, North America, even parts of China. June snows, July frosts, and endless grey skies. Imagine being a farmer then. You'd stored up food like always, thinking the growing season would come. It didn't. The wheat never grew, the livestock starved, and people had to decide between starving too, or breaking all the rules. Some boiled herbs scraped from under the ice, some ground up pine bark and mixed it with flour, what little flour they had. Others ate nettles or moss, or, if they were lucky, slaughtered a half-starved goat and prayed it didn't give them sickness. The lucky ones had root cellars. And root vegetables, bless them, are tough as nails, beets, potatoes, carrots. They keep in the right conditions, but only so many. And they only go so far. You wonder how your ancestors handled this. The ones who lived through famines, through wartime blockades, through winters that cracked the earth and people's spirits. In the 1600s, Finnish peasants made a kind of flour from lichen and tree bark. It took hours to grind and process it so it wouldn't poison you. And the bread it made? Hard, bitter, grey. But it filled you. At least for a while. There's something else you remember. Maybe from a book or a weird corner of the internet. Some medieval villages made famine cakes. No flour, no sugar, no eggs. Just dried leaves, mashed roots, and a pinch of dirt for grit. They weren't really food. They were placeholders. Calories scraped together from the edges of survival. Outside, the snow keeps falling. You find a rat trap you forgot about under the sink, empty. But that reminds you, people have eaten rats, roasted them, stewed them. In cities under siege like Leningrad or Paris during the Franco-Prussian War, rats were on menus, along with cats, dogs, even zoo animals. You're not there yet. Not quite. But it's only January. You shiver deeper into your blanket nest and stare at the ceiling again. You try to sleep, but it's hard. Your body won't let you forget how empty it is. In the silence, your thoughts drift to a village somewhere in Eastern Europe centuries ago. Snow falling just like this. A mother stirring a pot of water over the fire, adding twigs, a dash of salt, if she's lucky. A bone fished from the back of a cupboard. Her kids sit nearby, quiet, watching, knowing better than to ask what's for dinner. They know. It's something hot. That's the answer. That's all that matters. The fire is down to a slow breath, pulsing faint orange into the room. You haven't moved much. There's not really a reason to. Movement costs energy, and energy is in short supply. So you sit, bundled and still, your stomach quietly gnawing on itself. The daylight outside is blue-grey, stretched thin across a frozen landscape. Another long winter morning. You've lost count of how many, but you weren't always here. Back before the snow swallowed the earth, there was food. You remember harvesting, the last real push before winter tightened its grip. If you'd known how long the cold would last, maybe you'd have been greedier. Maybe you'd have stolen an extra sack of apples, hidden more roots, dried more meat. But you didn't. None of you did. In centuries past, people lived by the harvest cycle. Everything depended on how well autumn went. A good harvest meant a fighting chance. A bad one? Well, people started sharpening their rationing instincts early. In medieval England, the months between October and March were often called the hungry season, and they weren't joking. You'd store what you could. Onions platted and hung from the beams, grain sealed tight in barrels, apples kept in straw to avoid bruising, cabbage heads buried deep under straw mounds. It was a game of time and rot, one you often lost. In northern Japan, people used to dig snow caves to preserve things they'd gathered during the fall, fermented vegetables, dried mushrooms, even pickled fish. These weren't fancy pantries, they were tombs for food, nestled in icy crypts to stretch the last harvest into something survivable. But they were genius too, using the cold itself as protection. You glanced toward your cupboard again, remembering your own last harvest. There'd been squashes, those hard-skinned beasts that looked like they'd last forever. They didn't. You cooked the final one last week. It was stringy and tasteless, but your body welcomed it like a forgotten friend. Before that, there were apples, red ones bruised but sweet. You can almost still taste them, almost. And then there were the jars. You'd put up as much as you could. Jams, pickles, even a sad batch of sauerkraut that never quite fermented right. Most of that's gone now, eaten in the early days when you still believed the roads would clear and help would come. You rub your hands together, they're rough, cracked, and you notice your nails are oddly pale. That's new. Another small sign your body is shifting into preservation mode, turning inward, burning the soft parts first. Out the window, you spot something moving. A deer? No. Too small. Maybe a dog. No collar. Wild. It digs at the snow near a half-buried bush. You wonder if it's looking for food, too. You watch it, mesmerized, until it bolts at some invisible noise. The stillness returns. Your mind drifts again, across oceans and decades. You think of a family in 1800s Canada, huddled in a log cabin like yours, snow outside, a storm overhead. The father had stored squash, potatoes, and carrots in a root cellar dug under the floor. His trick, layers of sand. One layer of vegetables, one of sand, repeat. It worked, sort of. When they dug down weeks later, the bottom vegetables were rotten. But the top ones, they were still good. Cold, stiff, a little shriveled, but edible, and that mattered. People who knew how to survive understood the rules of storage, not just where, but how. In Russia, some peasants dug deep pits lined with straw and layered potatoes with dirt to keep them from freezing. The goal was to trick nature into thinking it was still autumn. It worked. If the temperature held steady, if it dipped too low, goodbye potatoes. Some communities even celebrated the final harvest with bleak ceremonies. In parts of Eastern Europe, there was a tradition of setting aside the last sheaf, the final bundle of wheat or barley, as a kind of spirit offering, a thank you and a prayer wrapped into one. Because once that harvest was done, there would be no more, not for months. Possibly not until you are someone very different, or not at all. Back in your own cabin, you run your hand across the shelf where the last of the dried herbs used to sit. Thyme, sage, a bit of dill. Spices might not be food, but they mattered. They gave boiled roots some kind of personality. Now there's only dust and a single stick of cinnamon, too valuable to waste. You open a small drawer and pull out your storage ledger. It's barely more than a piece of folded paper now, covered in scribbles, tallies, and scratched-out regrets. You wrote down every item you ate, every portion, every gamble. You remember when you crossed out the last of the honey, the last bit of butter, the final crumble of cheese. Those felt like big days, like losses. Now, everything feels like loss. In a fit of something between hunger and nostalgia, you flip back to the first page. The top line reads, Sep 30, canned peaches, 812 jar, saved rest. You can practically see them. Golden slices and syrup glowing like jewels. You ate the rest of that jar 3 days later during the first real snow. You weren't even hungry then. You were just scared. There's an odd comfort in remembering what you once had, even if it makes now hurt a little more. One thing you know for sure, hunger makes you grateful, painfully, stupidly, gut-wrenchingly grateful, for a boiled carrot, for a slice of stale bread, for a single clove of garlic. You remember reading how soldiers in World War I would trade cigarettes and bullets for onions. Actual onions. Not to eat raw, no, just to flavour their food, just to trick their mouths into remembering taste. That's what winter does when food is gone. It doesn't just empty your belly, it empties your world. It shrinks your priorities down to the shape of a spoon and the sound of a simmering pot. You stop thinking about goals, dreams, spring. You think about salt and fat and calories. That's it. Another gust of wind slams the door. You tighten your blanket. Your stomach growls again, more tired than angry this time. You wonder if tomorrow will be the day you try boiling those old pine needles. People say it makes a kind of tea, full of vitamin C supposedly. Supposedly. You wake to the sound of something soft and deliberate. Thump, thump, shuffle. Your eyes open wide, instantly alert. Not that you slept much. Sleep these days is just longer moments of staring at the darkness, your brain tripping over food memories. The sound came from the corner of the house near the storage hatch. You hold your breath. A rat maybe, a raccoon if you're lucky, or unlucky depending on its mood. Either way, you're suddenly very aware of how low you've gotten, that you're praying some kind of vermin wandered inside, that you might catch it, cook it, eat it. You creep over, breath puffing visibly. The floor creaks in protest. A few tense minutes pass before you realise the noise has stopped. Whatever it was, it's either gone or hiding. You settle back into your spot near the fire, but the thought lingers. There's something out there. Something moving through this frozen world just like you. Desperate. Hungry. If you're going to survive this, and that's still a very big if, you'll need more than good luck and old apples. You need to start thinking like the people who did survive. People who found nourishment in places you'd never thought to look. People who didn't just stock food. They engineered their entire storage systems to trick time, rot, and even animals. Root cellars, as rustic as they sound, were basically prehistoric refrigerators. No electricity, just cool, damp, stable temperatures. The trick was keeping it just above freezing. Too cold, and the food would turn to mush. Too warm, and mould would invite itself to dinner. In colonial America, every half-decent farmhouse had one. A hole in the earth lined with stone, packed with straw and covered with a hatch. Inside, onions braided and hung like chandeliers, carrots buried in sand, cabbage heads arranged like sleeping skulls. The goal was simple: make autumn last as long as it could. Some cultures took it even further. In Scandinavia, families used ice houses, structures specifically built to store large blocks of frozen lake ice, cut and hauled during the peak of winter. They packed meat around the ice blocks, layered with sawdust to insulate, and left them to hibernate. If done right, a slab of salted pork could last until spring. If done wrong, well, botulism is a rough way to go. You remember your own sad attempt at a root shelf last October? It was less a cellar and more a shadowy corner in the crawl space. You stacked a crate of potatoes, another of carrots, and a few hardy squash, lining everything with dry straw and whispering hopeful things to the gods of mould. For a while, it worked, but the temperature swung too much. One day in December, you opened the hatch and nearly gagged. The carrots had liquefied. The potatoes had grown long white fingers and smelled like wet socks. Only 2 of the squash survived. You made a soup and pretended it was delicious. It wasn't. Still, the principle remains. Cold is your enemy, sure, but it's also your ally. It slows decay, freezes time, quite literally. That's why ice fishing is still a thing. In Alaska and parts of Canada, indigenous communities built elaborate caches above ground, raised on poles to keep animals out. They'd dry fish in long strips, smoke them, and hang them like ribbons. By the time winter came, they had whole trees of preserved meat swaying gently in the wind. You think about the frozen lake just a mile from here. Not that you could walk that far right now without collapsing, but still, you imagine it. The sharp crack of an auger biting through the ice. The silence after. The waiting. Pulling up a silvery fish stiff with cold. You've never ice fished. But now the idea seems so simple, so elegant. Food, locked under glass. If only you had a line, a hook, the strength. Instead, you rummage through your dwindling pantry again, pretending something new might have magically appeared. It hasn't. But you do find a small burlap sack you forgot about, shoved behind a pot. You untie the top slowly, reverently. Inside, 3 onions, wrinkled. Soft in places. One is definitely rotting, but 2 seem salvageable. You don't smile, your face is too tired for that, but something in your chest lifts. 2 onions. You could stretch that across 3 meals if you tried, or 1 glorious soup if you wanted to gamble on joy. You sit back down, cradling them like eggs. This is what hope looks like now. It makes you think of the Irish during the Great Famine, not just the potato part, the rot that came from nowhere and stole their only real crop, but what happened after? The desperation, the creativity. They ground up fern roots and roasted nettles. Some boiled seaweed into a sludge called dulse stew. Others, too weak to scavenge, simply withered. In the Scottish Highlands, people survived on something called sowens, a sour porridge made from fermented oat husks. Not the oats, just the husks. Left to soak in water for a week, then strained, boiled, and served with whatever fat they had. Sometimes none at all. It was tart, gloopy, but it filled the gut. Kind of. You consider slicing one of your onions and steeping it in hot water. Onion tea. That's a thing, right? You're pretty sure you read it somewhere. Supposed to be good for colds. Or morale, or both. As you peel the papery skin off the smallest one, a sour tang rises into the room. It's sharp, familiar. Your stomach flips. Not in revulsion, but in anticipation. You never realized how good an onion could smell. You boil some water in your dented tin pot. The flame licks at it gently, cautious not to waste precious heat. You slice the onion thin, ribbons really, and drop them in. The water clouds slightly. A weak broth begins to take shape. You sit and stir with the wooden spoon, your one true companion these days. The smell intensifies. It's not much, it's barely anything. But for a moment the cabin feels full of something warm, something living. And that's the magic of winter food storage. The fact that one forgotten bulb hidden in burlap can bring your body back from the edge. You sip slowly, letting the hot broth roll across your tongue, salty from the scrap of bouillon you scrounged, sweet from the onion. You lean back, eyes closed. For the first time in days you don't feel like you're dying. Not yet, anyway. The steam from the onion broth lingers in the air like a ghost of better times. Your spoon scrapes the bottom of the pot with a sound that feels almost luxurious. Evidence that you just had a warm meal. Kind of. Your stomach isn't full, not even close, but it's no longer twisting in knots. It's quiet now. Suspicious maybe, but quiet. You pull the blanket tighter and lean against the wall, watching the flames dance. For a moment, there's peace. But it doesn't last. because you know that was one of your last ingredients, one of your last good things. And the part that keeps ringing in your head is that there's still weeks of winter left. Not just days, not almost there, weeks. That's a long time to be creative, or desperate. Your thoughts start shifting toward alternative sources, not ideas you like, but ones you've been entertaining quietly. You glance toward the back of the room, where a small wooden box sits beneath the bench. It used to hold rags, old cleaning cloths, cut-up shirts. Now it holds something else, a few hunks of dried meat. Not beef, not pork. You didn't ask questions when it was offered. It was during the last trade. A man with a beard like moss, eyes sunken like stone sockets, handed it over with a grunt. It smelled smoky, a little gamey, not spoiled. You took it. He wouldn't say what it was. You haven't touched it yet, but now you wonder. Maybe today is the day. Because here's the truth. When food is gone and real meat is out of reach, people throughout history have gotten inventive. You think about the stories you once read with a kind of horrified fascination. Now you remember them with a dull, gnawing curiosity. During the siege of Paris in 1870, the city was surrounded and starved for over 4 months. At first, people survived off their usual preserved stores: salt pork, canned fish, dried peas. But those ran out fast. Then came the rats, then came the cats, then came the zoo. No, really. The Parisian upper class dined on elephant, literally. The zoo's elephants were butchered and served with peppercorn sauce. There were menus advertising dishes like roast kangaroo leg and grilled antelope. That might sound like exotic luxury, but don't be fooled. That was desperation with a silver spoon, and it wasn't just Europe. In colonial America, when settlers ran out of meat in harsh winters, they turned to small game, which is a polite way of saying anything that moved. Squirrels, opossums, mice, even songbirds. Pigeons were a staple in some areas. Roasted whole or stewed, bones and all. You just had to get past the feathers and the look in their little eyes. There's a record from the early 1700s of fur traders in the Northern Territories boiling owl. Not in some ceremonial way, just owl stew. Apparently it tasted like stringy chicken if you added enough salt. If you had salt. You look down at your hands, they tremble slightly. Whether from the cold or the calories, it's hard to tell. Your mind starts cataloguing. Could you catch a squirrel? Maybe. They're fast, but you've seen 1 or 2 near the woodpile. You'd need a trap, bait, time, energy, things you're starting to run short on. You rise slowly, knees creaking, and head to the back of the room. You open the wooden box. The smell hits you first. Smoky, earthy, a little sour. You unwrap a chunk of the dried meat and stare at it. It's dark, hard, fibrous. Your nose wrinkles, but your stomach twitches. You slice off a piece with your pocket knife and chew slowly. It's tough, real tough, but not spoiled. There's fat, some protein. Your body perks up instantly, a faint buzz of warmth spreading through your limbs. Still, you try not to think about what it was. Probably deer. You tell yourself that. Definitely not dog, not something worse. There are worse things after all. In the Arctic, native groups survived winters on seal and whale. When they could catch them, every part was used. Meat, blubber, organs, nothing wasted. And when even that was gone, they turned to scavenging. Not just plants, but carrion. Frozen wolves, snow-buried carcasses left behind by predators. If the meat was still solid, you could boil it, kill the bacteria, call it stew. There's a documented case from early 1900 Siberia where a group of hunters survived on foxes and eventually their own hunting dogs. They cried as they did it, named the meals after the animals, apologized out loud, then ate. In a strange way, you envy that clarity, that certainty that you'll do whatever it takes. You're still hovering in the purgatory of maybe. Maybe it'll warm up, maybe someone will arrive. Maybe you'll get through without having to cross any dark thresholds. But the truth is, winter doesn't care, and neither does your stomach. You toss another sliver of meat into the broth pot, reheating the liquid from earlier. It darkens slightly, smells better, meatier. You sip it with shaking hands, trying not to cry when the warmth hits your chest. After you finish, you clean the pot with melted snow, careful not to waste a drop. That broth may be tomorrow's breakfast, or lunch, or both. The wind picks up outside. You hear the groan of branches shifting under snow weight, then silence, just the crackle of the fire and your breath. You think about how many people have sat in rooms just like this, listening to storms rage outside, knowing there was nothing left in the barn, nothing left in the cellar, nothing left but what they could find or kill or steal. In old Alpine villages there were stories, half folklore, half memory, of people sneaking into barns to milk their neighbours' goats at night. A pint of milk stolen could mean another day, another night of not starving. If you got caught, it was over. But if you didn't, maybe spring would come before anyone noticed. There's an old French proverb you once read. A hungry stomach has no ears. It means more or less that you stop listening to rules when you're starving. Morality becomes a luxury. You finally understand that now. You settle down near the fire again, chewing slowly on the last scrap from your broth. It sticks in your teeth. Your body is grateful, even if your brain recoils. You don't feel proud, but you do feel alive, and at this point, that might be enough. It's day 20-something of whatever's left cuisine, and you're starting to notice patterns, things you used to overlook. The way snow creaks under your boots at certain temperatures. The particular squeal the wind makes when it slips through the gap in the windowsill. And the way your body adjusts to less food, until it doesn't. Hunger comes in waves, but not like they say. It's not growling, not loud. It's quiet, a slow eroding, like frostbite of the soul. You used to cook with intention, recipes, measuring spoons, fresh herbs. Now, every meal is a negotiation, and recently, your eyes have turned toward the trees. It's not exactly common knowledge in modern kitchens, but yes, you can eat trees, or at least parts of them. It's not the first thing you consider, obviously, but in the dead of winter, with roots frozen solid and animals long gone, even the forest starts to look like a menu. You step outside into the icy light. It's bone-crack cold, but the sun is technically up, somewhere behind the haze. You scan the trees nearby, birch, pine, spruce. You eye the birch trunk, white and peeling like paper. The bark can be burned, sure, but also eaten. Well, kind of. Not the papery outer layer, that's mostly cellulose, but the inner bark, the cambium layer. A pale, soft ring hiding just beneath the surface. People have done this for centuries. In Scandinavia, birch bark was stripped, dried, ground, and mixed with rye to stretch flour supplies during times of famine. The result was a kind of bark bread. It sounds rustic and charming, until you're chewing it with saw gums and no butter. Then it just tastes like wood regret. You fetch your knife and gently score a line down the side of a thin birch tree. Not too deep. You're not trying to kill it. With slow, practiced patience, you peel a strip of bark, then carefully pull away the inner layer. It's tough but pliable, and even smells faintly sweet. Back inside, you lay the strips on a piece of old netting near the fire to dry. You know from reading that the cambium layer contains carbs, just a few, but your body is desperate enough to notice. You chew a small piece raw. It's fibrous, a little bitter, but chewable. You imagine it as jerky for people who have truly hit rock bottom. It's not just birch either. Pine trees offer something similar, and their needles can be brewed into a tea that contains vitamin C. Supposedly. You've heard stories, maybe myths, of explorers avoiding scurvy by steeping pine needle tea. You gather a small bundle, boil them and sip. It tastes like someone watered down a Christmas tree, but your body accepts it with a sort of desperate politeness. You pretend it's refreshing. Your thoughts drift again, to other winters, darker ones. There's an account from World War II during the siege of Leningrad that's lodged permanently in your mind. The city was surrounded by German forces, cut off from food and fuel for 872 days. Temperatures plunged and people, millions, were trapped inside. In the beginning they ate pets, then rats, then paste scraped from wallpaper, because the glue was made from potato starch. Families boiled leather belts, book bindings, anything organic. One woman reportedly made cookies from sawdust and water, flattened and baked just enough to fool a child's hunger for a few hours. There's a fringe theory that's still debated among historians, that bark flour during these sieges may have actually prolonged life more than people realised. Not because it was nutritious, but because chewing it gave the illusion of eating, a sort of psychological survival hack. You try to believe that now, as you chew on a bark strip and imagine it doing something good. Your jaw aches, your teeth feel loose, but you keep going. It's something. You pass the afternoon trying to process more of the bark, dried, ground down with a smooth stone, mixed with a spoonful of the last flour you have. It becomes a kind of dough, technically. You shape it into a flat puck and cook it over the embers, turning it until the outside chars slightly. The smell is earthy, almost like popcorn burned in a cave. The taste, like bitterness soaked in hope. But it's warm and chewable, and yours. Across time, across geography, the idea of hunger bread has shown up again and again. In Norway, bark bread is called barkabrød, made from pine bark mixed with flour. In Finland, it was a last resort during crop failures. In parts of northern China, people resorted to elm bark during famines. These weren't culinary traditions, they were quiet acts of not dying. You remember reading a line once that stuck with you. People don't eat bark because it tastes good. They eat it because it reminds them they're still human. You get that now. There's something almost defiant about turning a tree into dinner. It says, you haven't won yet, winter. As the sun starts to dip, though it never fully rises this time of year, you prepare another puck. You sprinkle in some salt. It's the last of it. But if you're going to eat tree parts, you might as well do it with dignity. The result is slightly better. Not great, but better. You eat slowly, eyes closed, imagining it's something else. A biscuit. A thick slice of toast with jam. Anything. You think about how many people have done exactly this. Not just poor farmers or ancient tribes, but ordinary people in extraordinary times. During Napoleon's retreat from Russia in 1812, starving soldiers stripped trees for bark, sometimes gnawing on twigs like desperate beavers. Some died with bits of it still in their mouths. In Iceland, volcanic eruptions in the 18th century wiped out crops and livestock. The people made lava bread, a kind of rye flatbread baked underground using geothermal heat, often mixed with moss or tree fibre. It wasn't glamorous. It was survival by any means. You stir the fire and let your hand hover near the warmth. Your breath is slow now. Full stomach. No, but not empty either. And these days, that's enough to fall asleep to. You crawl back into your nest of blankets, the scent of burned bark and pine still clinging to your clothes. You feel something strange, not full, not happy, but proud, in a quiet, exhausted sort of way. The wind picks up again. The door shudders, but you don't. Tonight, you've made food out of a tree. You're still here. Morning arrives not with light, but with a subtle shift in the shadows. The sky a dull slate grey, like wet stone pressed against glass. You open your eyes to the familiar ache in your bones, the unglamorous stiffness of cold and hunger. There's no ceremony to waking up anymore, just a moment where your brain checks to see if you're still here. And your stomach replies with a low, empty confirmation. The fire's gone out again. Of course it has. The embers cooled sometime during the night, and the cabin is holding its breath. You pull yourself from the warmth of your blankets, moving like a puppet with tangled strings. Everything creaks. Knees, ankles, spine. You wonder if you've lost weight, then immediately realise how ridiculous that sounds. Of course you have. You're basically on the extreme scarcity diet, endorsed by history's coldest months. Today you're thinking about fish. Not fresh ones, those are long gone, but the frozen kind. The kind preserved in thick blocks of ice, chipped out of lakes or creeks and stored by clever hands who understood the cruel timing of winter. If you'd lived a few centuries earlier, or in a place with a little more collective foresight, you might have had an ice house, a proper one. Ice houses weren't just big coolers, they were architectural lifelines, dug deep into the ground or built above it with walls thick as a bear's hide packed with sawdust or straw. They held ice and frozen goods like treasure chests. In 18th century New England, wealthy families would haul ice in by the ton, cut from lakes in massive blocks. They stored meat, milk, even butter down there. Some ice houses lasted until late summer, still holding on to their chill like a promise. Even before refrigeration, people were thinking like engineers. In northern China, entire cities dug underground chambers into low soil to keep perishables frozen. In Russia, fish markets were supplied by men who fished all winter long, breaking through the surface of rivers and dragging out sturgeon that froze solid before they made it back to shore. Fish that rang when you tapped them. You think of that now as you crack open the trapdoor to your own excuse for a cold storage space. A square pit under the floor, half filled with snow and old straw. It's a gamble every time you open it. Last time, you found a single frozen beet, shriveled but edible. Today, a miracle, a chunk of something pinkish-white wrapped in a scrap of cloth. You forgot about it. Dried fish, salted once, months ago. It's hard as a brick, cold as regret. But it's food. Back upstairs, you set a pot to melt some snow. The fish goes in, slowly, like a relic being offered to the gods of desperation. It starts to soften in the water, releasing that distinct sharp scent. Salty, a little sour. Your mouth waters automatically like muscle memory. You could eat it raw, but you're not quite there yet. You can still afford the firewood to heat it through. For now. As it simmers, you think about other cultures that lived on fish in the dead of winter. The Inuit, for example, perfected the art of freezing and fermenting fish as a survival technique. One traditional dish, kiviak, involves stuffing hundreds of small seabirds into a sealskin, sealing it tight, and letting it ferment under rocks for months. It sounds grotesque, until you realise it was a way to survive the polar night. Fat, protein, nutrients, and no cooking required. Some archaeologists believe ancient Arctic peoples survived entire winters on nothing but fermented fish and whale blubber. Even in the Scottish Highlands, fish was a staple in winter. Salt cod and smoked haddock hung from rafters like kitchen chandeliers, rehydrated days later for broth or pies. Meanwhile, in Japan, families in snowy villages dried small river fish on wooden racks, letting the icy air preserve them until it was time to eat. A delicate process of trust in the cold. You fish a piece out of your pot, pun fully intended, and nibble a corner. It's not good. Let's be clear. It's chewy, tough, and carries a hint of whatever else was stored in that pit. But it's something. It tastes like the ocean took a wrong turn and wound up in your kitchen. And your body, starved as it is, practically weeps with gratitude. There's a theory among survival experts that taste is secondary in extreme conditions. Texture, temperature, and salt become the only things that matter. You believe it. You could eat cardboard if it was warm and salty. Maybe you have. You're not keeping track anymore. You scoop out more of the fish, careful not to waste a drop of the broth. That water is infused now with sodium, fat, and memory. You remember something an old man once said at a camping seminar. If you boil food in water, don't drink the soup last. Drink it first. That's where the life is. At the time you laughed. Now you understand the poetry of it. You sip the broth slowly. Your stomach stretches cautiously. The warmth spreads, not just through your gut, but through your fingers, your scalp, your bones. It's not a feast, but it's fuel, and that's the currency of survival. Later, you wrap the remaining fish in a rag and tuck it near the fire to keep it from freezing again. You have enough for maybe 2 more meals. That's 2 more reasons not to panic. 2 more excuses to keep sitting upright. You lie back and stare at the ceiling beams. In the silence, you start counting cracks in the wood. Anything to stay present. Anything to not drift too far into the future, where spring still feels like a fairy tale. Your mind wanders, like it always does. This time to Finland, where farmers would ice fish through holes cut with crude chisels. They'd pull out pike and perch and store them whole, frozen stiff, stacked in sheds like firewood. Kids would break off chunks and gnaw them like popsicles. A harsh land builds strange habits. But the fringe fact that always got you, the one that feels closer to you now than ever, is this. In the gulags of Siberia, prisoners sometimes survived off frozen fish filched from supply trains. Not cooked, just eaten raw, frozen, sliced like sashimi made of sadness. They said it was oddly delicious if you ignored everything else. You finish the last sip of broth and set your bowl down. The heat has left your face, but it lingers in your chest, like a little sun. It's not joy, but it's not hunger. For tonight, that's the closest thing to peace. The smell hits you before you even open your eyes. It's faint, sour, and a little funky. Not quite bad, but definitely something that used to be food, and is now in that questionable in-between state. You blink awake and realise it's coming from the corner where the fermentation jars live, or what's left of them anyway. You drag yourself upright with a grunt. Another night survived, another bone-cold morning pressing down on you like wet wool. The fire is dead again, always is. But there's a little comfort in the routine of reviving it. 1 stick of kindling, 2 if you're reckless. That flick of the match, second to last now, and the slow coaxing of warmth into the room. You shuffle to the jars. There are 3. 1 is long gone, crusted with ancient pickle residue that smells like defeat. The second contains something you're almost certain started life as cabbage. It's grey now and you're not emotionally prepared to open it. But the third, that's the one sending out that sharp, nose-pinching tang. You lift the cloth lid and peek inside. Fermentation. It's alive. It's working. Sort of. This was supposed to be your winter ace. Your yak planned ahead moment. Back in the fall, you chopped up vegetables. Onions, carrots, a few sad radishes, and packed them into jars with salt water, hoping they'd transform into something edible through the ancient magic of lactic acid fermentation. You weren't aiming for gourmet, just edible. Something with a bite. Something that could last. What you got was something that smells like gym socks soaked in vinegar. But still, it's food, sort of. People have done worse. In fact, fermentation was the original refrigerator. Long before modern tech and even before widespread root cellars, people preserved their harvests by encouraging rot. Controlled, purposeful rot. Sauerkraut, kimchi, pickled turnips, fermented fish, all developed as ways to trick the clock. In Korea, massive earthenware jars called ongi were buried in the ground to keep kimchi cool and let it ferment slowly over winter. The result? A spicy, funky, vitamin-packed dish that helped people survive the lean months. Same story in Eastern Europe, where cabbage became sauerkraut and turned into a lifeline. In parts of Russia, folks would drink the juice straight from the kraut barrel to stave off scurvy. And scurvy, that creeping thief of teeth and sanity, isn't just for pirates. When the only things on your winter menu are starches and dried meat, your body starts revolting. Bleeding gums, loose teeth, exhaustion, even hallucinations. A few sips of fermented vegetable juice, and suddenly your brain lights back up. You take a spoon, the wooden one that's slowly becoming a part of your hand, and scoop out a sliver of what's in the jar. It's slimy. But not in the don't eat this way, in the probably probiotic way. You sniff. It bites your nose. You taste. Your mouth flinches. Your brain screams, and then something miraculous happens. Your tongue remembers flavour. Salt. Acid. A weird, peppery aftertaste. It's not delicious, but it's real. It's loud in a way nothing else has been for days. You take another bite, smaller this time. Your stomach stirs like a hibernating bear poked with a stick. Hey, it says, do that again. You lean against the table and keep eating. Slowly. You're not trying to shock the system. That's how you end up revisiting your food the hard way. But this could work. This could stretch. You've heard stories about families in Poland surviving entire winters on pickled things. Beets, cucumbers, garlic. They'd keep giant crocks in the cellar, layer after layer of produce brined in salt, sealed with wax or animal fat. Some fermented for months before being eaten. The brine alone became a meal, thinned with hot water, maybe a potato, maybe not. You sip the juice from your own jar. It burns a little, in a good way. There's something primal about fermented food. It's alive, for one, literally. Bacteria working behind the scenes, breaking things down, releasing vitamins, creating acids. It's the kitchen version of hope. You bury something and wait for it to become better. Of course, it can also go horribly wrong. There are horror stories, old and new, of people pushing fermentation too far. In Scandinavia, there's a dish called surströmming, a fermented herring that's so pungent it's legally banned from being opened indoors on airplanes. There's a debate over whether it's food or a biological weapon. Some argue it's delicious, once you get past the initial olfactory assault. Others argue they never want to get past it. In some parts of Central Asia, fermented mare's milk, called kumis, is still consumed. Slightly alcoholic, slightly sour, definitely controversial. Travellers either praise it as a probiotic miracle or vow never to speak of it again. But all these dishes, weird or wonderful, grew from the same place. Desperation meets ingenuity. You eat another spoonful from the jar and feel it warm your throat. Not from heat, but from bite. It's almost spicy now. That might just be your imagination trying to interpret what taste feels like after so long on boiled water and tree bark. The rest of the day passes quietly. You ration out 3 more spoonfuls, spacing them between long naps and short walks to keep the blood flowing. At one point you step outside just to stand in the sun. It's weak, barely there, but you tilt your face toward it anyway, like a lizard on a cold rock. Inside, the cabin smells faintly of vinegar now. It's sharp but familiar, a reminder that something is still transforming in here, that everything hasn't frozen solid, not yet. You settle by the fire again, watching the shadows stretch. Hunger still paces in the background, but it's quieter today, tamed temporarily by the funk and fire of ferment. There's one more jar you haven't dared open, the one you buried outside under snow in a sealed crock. If it survived, it might hold the last real flavour of your fall. Apples, fermented with honey and spices. You'd forgotten about it until now. A gamble, but what isn't? You think you'll dig it up tomorrow. Tonight you sleep with salt on your tongue and vinegar in your blood. It's not comfort food, but it's survival food. And that's enough. The wind howls all night, pressing against the walls with the weight of 1,000 old ghosts, but you barely stir. Something about salt in your blood and something sour in your belly seems to help you sleep deeper, heavier. You wake slowly, cocooned in layers of stiff blankets and your own body heat. For a second, just one, you forget. Forget the hunger, the cold, the endless sameness of survival. But it comes back quickly. It always does. You pull yourself upright and stare toward the door where snow has drifted in through the cracks. It looks like someone tossed a bag of flour into the corner during the night. Outside, the storm's still going, but lighter now. The sky is a dull, bruised silver. It might even be warm enough today to try a dig. You promised yourself you'd go for the buried jar, the fermented apples. That sweet, spiced science project you sealed away months ago and almost gave up on. You wrap yourself tightly and step outside, shovel in hand. Your boots crunch through the crusted surface. The snow's deeper than you thought. The shovel bites into it like an old man chewing steak. Slow, loud, a little sad. You remember the spot roughly and begin to dig. Inch by inch, the cold burns your fingers through the gloves. You're panting by the time you strike something solid, wood or stone. You scrape carefully, hands trembling with effort and anticipation. There it is, a ceramic crock, half iced over, sealed tight. You lift it from its snowy grave like an archaeologist unearthing treasure. Back inside, it sits on the hearth while you chip the ice from the lid. The cabin smells faintly of vinegar and wet wool. You finally pop it open with the heel of your palm and freeze, half expecting something to lunge out or hiss. But no, it's quiet, still. Inside, the apples float in golden, cloudy brine, speckled with cinnamon and cloves. You dip a spoon in, taste. Your mouth explodes with sensation, sweet, tart, almost fizzy. Your eyes actually water. This isn't just food. This is memory. This is fall. This is sun and sugar and everything you thought you'd lost. You laugh. A real one. It catches in your throat and turns into a cough, but it's real. You eat 3 slices, slowly, reverently, then put the lid back on. You don't want to waste the whole miracle in one sitting. Not when you could stretch this over a week, maybe longer. You sit by the fire and sip hot water steeped in pine needles, watching the crock like it's a holy relic. You think about all the soups you've made, some intentional, some accidental, and how, even now, with barely anything left, you can still boil something and call it a meal. Soup is the great equalizer. Rich or poor, ancient or modern, when people run out of food, they make soup, thin it with water, add bones, add whatever's left. Let it simmer until it smells like nourishment. In medieval Europe, peasants made perpetual stew, a pot that never emptied, only had new ingredients added when possible. It sat on the hearth for months, sometimes years, a literal living dish, forever changing, forever feeding. You are your own pot. It's far from perpetual, but you've refilled it with melted snow and the leftover apple brine. You toss in a few pine needles for flavour and stir it with the spoon, half dreaming. You know it's not real soup. It's a memory of soup. But sometimes that's enough. You've heard the phrase stone soup, from that old folk tale where a hungry stranger convinces a village to contribute ingredients to a soup that starts with just a rock. It's a story about sharing, community, a lesson in generosity. But you always thought the real magic of stone soup was psychological. It made people feel like something was happening, that they were part of something bigger than their hunger. Maybe that's why people make soup when times get hard. It feels active, stirring, sipping, simmering. You may be starving, but you're still participating in the ritual of eating, still trying. And then there's the darker cousin to soup, what they used to call nail soup in parts of Europe. Same idea as stone soup, but without the cheerful parable. A real iron nail, boiled in water with maybe a few herbs if you had them. The idea being that the iron could leach into the water, giving you at least some nutrients. It was a lie, mostly, but it gave people something to sip. You tried it once. Took a rusty nail from the woodpile and boiled it for an hour with pine bark. The water turned slightly brown. It tasted like regret and damp tools. You didn't do it again. But it taught you something. There's a certain strength in going through the motions of a meal, even if the meal doesn't exist. You stir your fake soup and sip. Sweet, woody, slightly acidic. Not exactly delicious, but it doesn't matter. What matters is you're warm, you're upright, you're still chewing. You wonder if people during famines found comfort in the act of stirring soup, even if the pot was empty. Maybe they stirred just to hear the sound, to remind themselves they still had hands, a bowl, a spoon. There's a fringe theory you remember reading once, that humans developed language not for hunting or fighting, but for sharing recipes. That early tribes bonded over fire and food, not war. Soup as the original social glue. You like that idea? Feels softer, feels human. You eat 2 more slices of fermented apple, 1 more sip, then wrap the jar tight and bury it again in the snow outside. Not too deep this time, close enough to dig up if you need it, but far enough to resist the temptation of eating it all at once. Back inside, you stare at the fire, at the pot, at your spoon. You're not full, you're not even close, but you've eaten. You've fed something inside you that isn't just physical. Soup may not solve hunger, but it sure knows how to lie to it beautifully. You chew slowly, carefully, not on food, but on leather. Real leather, from the strap of an old boot that's been hanging by the door like some rustic decoration since before the first snow. You swore you'd never touch it, swore it was for emergencies only, but the line between emergency and daily life has long since blurred, like footprints under fresh snowfall. So here you are, knife in hand, stripping slivers from the boot's tongue and boiling them like meat, like stew meat, if you squint your imagination hard enough. And no, you're not proud of this, but you're also not as horrified as you thought you'd be. That's the strange part. The first few bites are awful, rubbery, bland, tinged with chemical aftertaste, but they soften the longer you chew. Your jaw aches. Your teeth feel like they're gnawing a belt buckle, but it's warm, it's chewable, it fills the empty space, if only for a few moments. It turns out you're not the first to eat your own wardrobe. History is full of people eating things never meant to be food. Leather, parchment, shoe soles. When the Donner Party got trapped in the Sierra Nevadas in 1846, they boiled rawhide for hours, turning it into a kind of sticky glue paste they swallowed like gruel. Survivors later recalled it as bitter but filling. That's a generous way to describe despair, honestly. During the siege of Leningrad, when people had eaten through the flower stores, the pets, the wallpaper paste, they turned to leather belts and bags, boiled them, scraped off whatever finish had been applied. Anything tanned without chemicals could technically be digested if you softened it long enough. Technically digestible is now your dietary standard. And then there's the Battle of Bergen-op-Zoom in 1814. Dutch soldiers under siege ate saddles. Yes, saddles. They roasted the thick leather in ashes and scraped it thin before chewing. Reports say it kept them alive just long enough to be relieved by reinforcements. You imagine their joy as the cavalry arrived and they spat out the last soggy mouthful of reins. You weren't alive during any of that, obviously, but it's strange how quickly those stories stop sounding like extreme outliers and start sounding like familiar options. The brain adjusts. Fast. You boil another piece of leather. This time you add salt from the bottom of an old tin, a pinch of dried pine needle, and, on a whim, a few drops of the apple brine. Your version of fine dining. The broth is not good. It smells like a hardware store. But again, it's hot, and it's something. You can almost pretend it's beef stew if you close your eyes and completely disassociate. And the thing is, this has been done on purpose before. Really. During the Great Famine in China, some villagers made a kind of soup called bitter skin broth, made from boiled bark, leather and scrap cloth. Not because they didn't know better, because they didn't have a choice. You sip slowly, then let your mind wander. You start wondering which other objects in the house could, in theory, be boiled. You eye the old book on the shelf, the one with the water-warped cover and missing spine. It's about farming techniques, appropriate in a way. You recall that parchment and glue-based bindings were once made with animal products, meaning that book might, in some backwards twist of logic, have more calories than a raw carrot. You push the thought aside, for now. Then there's the firewood, not just for heat but also maybe for bark. If you ever get desperate again, you know where to look, and the woven seat of that old chair, probably jute or hemp, fibre, sort of. You could chew it if things get worse. Again, for now, you don't. But the list is forming in your mind like a menu scratched into the walls. You pause halfway through your boot soup and stare into the middle distance. This is what hunger does. It steals your pride first, then your clarity. Eventually it starts to whisper the names of things you'd never dreamed of eating and convinces you they don't sound so bad. There's an unsettling comfort in knowing you're not alone in this madness. That across centuries thousands of people have made these same calculations. Some boiled their belts, some ground bones into powder to stretch their flour. Others made bread from clay and oil, like in parts of ancient Egypt during famine years. They'd form cakes from silt and fat, bake them into hard discs and nibble until their teeth cracked. A meal and a dental hazard all in one. There's even a fringe debate among historians about whether certain Roman soldiers ate boiled scrolls during siege periods. Inked parchment, soaked and stewed. A terrible meal, and a tragic loss of knowledge in one mouthful. It's not widely accepted, but you believe it. Hunger makes logic elastic. You keep chewing your leather, noticing how it becomes stringy like pulled pork. If pork were made of old luggage, you imagine serving this to someone at a dinner party, describing the flavour with fake elegance. Notes of saddle with a hint of desperation. A soft laugh escapes your throat. It surprises you. It's been days since you made a noise for pleasure, even if it's dark humour. The absurdity of it all hits you like a warm blanket. Here you are, boiling boots, cracking jokes about belt soup and somehow still upright, still functioning, still here. You finish the broth. It leaves a greasy film on your tongue and a quiet warmth in your chest. Not satisfaction exactly, just less emptiness. You clean the pot with snow and wipe it dry. The smell of boiled leather clings to the air like a campfire made of shoes. You don't mind it as much as you probably should. Tonight you sleep thinking about the remaining half of that boot. You wonder how many meals are left in it. You wonder if, at some point, you'll look at your gloves and see more than clothing. And then you wonder, only half kidding, what else in this house might pair well with apple brine? Word count 1102. Awaiting continue. Section 10. You wake up dreaming of cake. Not just any cake, something outrageous. A dense chocolate layer cake, tall as your forearm, with fudge icing that drips down the sides like a lava flow of luxury. You're at a table, fork in hand, about to cut into it. And just as your fork touches the surface, you wake up, and the only thing on your tongue is the bitter, furry aftertaste of boiled boot. Typical. You sit up slowly, body stiff and curled like an old root. The fire's out again, the windows are fogged. Your lips are cracked, and your brain is still whispering cake like it's a prayer. You ignore it, or try to. Fantasizing about desserts right now feels like dreaming about swimming pools in the middle of a desert. Pointless, cruel, but apparently unavoidable. It gets you thinking, though, not about sweets, but about the ways people have tricked themselves into feeling full. How? When winter claws into your bones and the pantry's a sad museum of empty jars, the mind becomes your most powerful kitchen tool. Sometimes the only one. You've read about it. You've even tried some of the techniques without fully realizing it. Drinking hot water slowly. Filling your bowl with just enough to sip from and pretending it's a real meal. Chewing slowly. Adding ritual to every bite to stretch time and illusion. Because when there's no food left, what you have to eat is the idea of food. In war zones and famines, people have been known to stage meals without eating them. Setting a table. Pouring water into empty cups. Holding knives and forks over nothing. A pantomime for the children, mostly. A way to pretend everything was still normal, that the roast was just running late. You think about doing it now, lighting a candle, sitting down at the table like a guest in your own home. Why not? You pull yourself up and walk across the room to the table. The chair groans as you sit. You arrange your bowl and spoon neatly in front of you, pour yourself a cup of snowmelt, and sit with your hands folded. You close your eyes and picture dinner. Not the fantasy cake this time, something humbler. A stew, thick and brown, steam curling up from it, chunks of carrot and potato. Maybe some bits of beef, crusty bread on the side. Your stomach actually reacts, something between a whimper and a hopeful grunt. You spoon nothing into your mouth. You chew air, slowly, then again. It feels ridiculous, but oddly grounding. In the 1930s, during the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression, families in Oklahoma and Kansas used to do something similar. They'd hand children empty bowls and tell them to imagine what they were eating. Parents would go so far as to season the food with pretend pepper or salt. One woman recalled sprinkling dirt from the floor into a tin cup to make mud tea. It wasn't just about survival, it was about dignity. The idea that you were still participating in a human ritual, even when reality had nothing left to offer. There are fringe studies that suggest just thinking about food can cause the brain to release small amounts of dopamine. That imagined satisfaction, even without the calories, can give a body just enough comfort to push through a few more hours. It won't stop starvation, obviously. But it might quiet the panic. And that's the real enemy now. Not just hunger, but fear. Fear of what's coming next. Fear of what you'll have to eat next. Fear of whether you'll cross a line you swore you never would. So you create rituals, tricks, illusions. You light a stub of candle and let it flicker on the table. You close your eyes again and eat your invisible stew, biting into nothing like it's tender meat. You breathe slowly between bites, imagining how it feels to feel full. It's surprisingly effective. For about 5 minutes, you don't feel hollow. Somewhere a floorboard pops. The wind rattles something loose on the roof. Life continues, indifferent. You think of the people in Siberian work camps, how they'd trade stories about food more than anything else. Men would sit in bunks whispering recipes to each other, recounting meals their mothers made, describing in agonizing detail the process of baking a pie. They said it helped them survive, that imagining those meals was like borrowing calories from memory. You remember a line from one of those memoirs. We lived on soup and stories. The soup was weak, but the stories were thick. You love that. Thick stories. You've got a few of those tucked away. You let your mind drift into one now. A kitchen, years ago, with the smell of garlic and butter and laughter. You cling to it. Taste it. Some cultures took this even further. In parts of sub-Saharan Africa, during lean seasons, families would make hunger dough, a paste of clay and water rolled into small balls and dried, not to be eaten for nutrition, but as a way to fill the stomach. The clay would sit in the gut like a placeholder, easing the ache. Dangerous, yes. But people calculated the risk against the certainty of starvation. Sometimes, the body needed to believe it had eaten, even if it hadn't. In Haiti, something similar. Dirt cookies, made from clay, salt, and shortening, sold in open markets, shaped with care, like any normal treat. They weren't meant for indulgence. They were meant for survival. You think about that as you press your hand into the table and wonder what it would be like to eat paper. Would it tear or melt? Would it go down easy? Your eyes wander to the window, where frost has etched delicate patterns, like ferns or feathers. Beautiful if you weren't living inside them. The air's still bitter, but the light is a bit stronger today. Spring exists. Somewhere. Just not here. Not yet. You clean your imaginary dishes with real snow and return them to the shelf. You feel better than you did an hour ago. Not full, no, but less haunted. You start thinking about what's left. There's still the rest of the fermented apples, a few spoonfuls of bark flour, some bits of leather you haven't boiled yet, and then, of course, there's the snow. Not food, but filling. You could make it into something again. Snow pancakes, ice porridge, frost cakes. Imaginary recipes for an imaginary menu. Tonight, maybe you'll invite someone over in your head. An old friend, your sister, someone who always brought good wine. You'll serve them soup made from nothing and they'll compliment the seasoning. You'll all laugh, toast the cold away. You're not crazy. Not yet, just imaginative. You've been avoiding it. Not consciously at first, but with the same quiet determination you use to walk past empty jars without peeking inside, or to ignore the deep groan of your stomach like it's just background noise. But now there's no avoiding it. The cow is dead. You didn't name her. On purpose. You knew that was a line not to cross. It makes what's coming now a little easier, but only a little. The first time she went quiet, just standing in the corner of the shed, not chewing, not blinking, you told yourself it was just the cold. Maybe she needed rest, or a little salt. Then you noticed her ribs starting to show, more bone than cow. There was nothing left to feed her, and no one around to trade with. She made it longer than you thought she would. Honestly, she made it longer than most humans would have. You bundled up this morning and made the walk through hip-deep snow to the shed, heart thudding like a drum you didn't want to hear. She was lying down, stretched awkwardly across the straw, eyes open, but not in a way that meant anything anymore. You didn't cry. You just stood there, waiting for the cold to confirm what you already knew. And now comes the hard part. Historically, the family cow was a symbol of survival. She gave milk, warmth, sometimes companionship. In old agrarian households, she was a kind of four-legged pantry. You didn't eat the cow unless everything else had failed. Not because of sentiment, though there was often plenty of that, but because she was more useful alive than dead. But now she's neither. You remember reading once about Norse families during especially brutal winters, how they'd huddle in shared barns with their animals, sharing body heat, feeding the cow first, because if the cow died, the family was next. And still, when things reached that razor edge, they'd kill her. Not cruelly, just finally. You step into the shed with your knife and the sharpest hunger you felt in days. It feels wrong, but also inevitable. This isn't some emergency scenario from history class. This is now. You work slowly, carefully. There's a grim reverence to it. You've never butchered anything this big before, but you remember diagrams from old farming books. You do your best. At first the work is mechanical, then it's emotional, then it's just cold. The snow helps, keeps everything from spoiling. Keeps the smell at bay. You wrap what you can in cloth and bury the rest in snow outside. It's not a perfect system, but it's enough. Back in the cabin, you build a real fire, not just a flickering heat, but a true flame. This feels like an occasion. You boil water, add a strip of muscle, a bit of fat, and a pinch of salt from what little remains. The smell hits you halfway through the first simmer. Rich, wild, familiar, but distant. Your stomach grumbles with a kind of grief-tinged anticipation. You sip the broth first. It's thinner than your memory wants it to be, but stronger than anything you've had in weeks. Then comes the meat. Chewy, warm, tinged with a flavour you'd forgotten. Nourishment. Not bark, not leather, not fantasy. This is real. You eat slowly. Not out of respect, but out of preservation. You have to make this last. In wartime Russia, there were stories, half fact, half rumour, of whole communities surviving off a single cow, eating every part, boiling hooves for gelatin, rendering fat into candles and soup, drying strips of meat into jerky. Some even used the hide for insulation, lining their walls with it. Nothing went to waste. You wonder what you'll do with the bones. They could be boiled again and again into stock, each round weaker than the last, but still better than nothing. You've heard of stone bones, where people boiled the same bone for weeks, just adding water, a pinch of something green, a sprig of nothing. Eventually the bone disintegrated. At that point, even calcium dust was a blessing. There's a fringe historical account you once read about a family during the Irish potato famine who buried a cow bone in their garden, not for food, but as a kind of charm. They believed it would bring back the crops, that the spirit of the cow would protect them. Desperation births strange rituals. You don't mock it, you understand it now. You finish your meal, not all of it, just enough. You wrap the rest and store it near the door where the cold keeps watch better than any lock. And for the first time in what feels like forever, your body isn't complaining. Your hands don't tremble, your thoughts don't race. You just sit there, near the fire, feeling heavy, warm, and guilty. Because this wasn't how it was supposed to go. You were going to outlast winter together. You fed her until there was nothing left to give. You kept her alive longer than anyone else would have. But still, she died. And now, she's your dinner. You lean back, staring at the ceiling. The cabin creaks around you. The snow outside sighs against the door. There's no music, no prayers, but this feels like a funeral anyway. You think about the Inuit, how they used every single piece of every animal. Organs eaten raw for vitamins, bones turned to tools, Bladders used for storage. Death was never waste. It was part of the cycle. You try to believe that now. You close your eyes and let the warmth settle in your core. Not joy, not relief, just warmth. You'll live another few days, maybe weeks, because of her. That has to mean something. Maybe that's what survival really is. Not just eating what's left, but doing it without looking away. The first time you consider eating a candle, you're not even that hungry. Not really. Not compared to some of the other days. But it's there, on the table, stubby and half melted, with a thin layer of dust clinging to its side. And it smells faintly of vanilla. Or maybe that's just your brain filling in blanks it desperately wants to be true. You stare at it for a while, then pick it up and sniff. Not appealing exactly, but not revolting either. Waxy. Neutral. You chew the edge of your thumbnail and consider the logistics. Is it technically food? You remember reading somewhere that wax has calories. Not good ones, not useful ones. But still, energy is energy, and your body doesn't care what form it comes in anymore. So yes, you break a piece off. Just a sliver. You warm it between your fingers, soften it, and then, with the ceremonial weight of someone crossing a line they never imagined they'd approach, you put it in your mouth. It's disgusting. Like licking a plastic bag someone spilled perfume on, but you chew, and swallow, and sit there for a moment, evaluating the consequences. Nothing happens, no instant nausea, no immediate regret. This is where you are now, eating candles and judging their performance like a food critic for some post-apocalyptic cooking show. The truth is, this isn't new. People have eaten worse. In the 19th century, shipwrecked sailors stranded on icebergs rationed candles made from whale fat, sometimes mixing melted wax with snow to make a sad soup. In besieged cities during World War II, families boiled tallow candles when nothing else was left. Not for flavour, there wasn't any, but for fat. That precious, elusive nutrient your body screams for when it's burning itself from the inside out. And during the French Revolution, a group of political prisoners famously ate their candles in the Bastille, treating each inch like a slice of cake, rationed and revered. One wrote in his diary, "Today we had dessert." You love the dark optimism of that. The candle you just ate was mostly soy wax, not tallow, so your stomach will probably forgive you. But you're already eyeing the rest of them like they're part of a menu. There's a green one, pine-scented. Probably a mistake. A blue one shaped like a star. A couple tea lights. A red pillar candle that might just be paraffin. That one's risky, but you're not above risks anymore. And then you remember the crayons. There's a box of them somewhere, buried in a drawer near the back of the room. Leftovers from a niece's visit last spring. You dig through the drawer, fingers numb and clumsy, until you find it. A bright cardboard box bent at the corners but still sealed. Inside, a dozen cheerful wax cylinders in every colour. It's absurd, laughable even, but you're past the point of irony. You pull out a red one, cherry red, smells faintly like childhood, like glue sticks and graham crackers. You hesitate, then bite. The texture is awful, waxy, flaky, like chewing a candle dipped in dust, but your brain picks up on the faint sweetness. Not real sugar, of course, but just enough artificial flavouring to trick you for a second. And that second is worth something. There's actually a half-serious survival guide out there that lists crayons as edible in emergency situations. The internet laughed at it, but you remember it now with a kind of grim appreciation. Each crayon is about 35 calories. Multiply that by 12, and suddenly you've got a snack with the caloric value of a small sandwich. If you ignore the fact that it's made entirely of synthetic wax and pigment, the human body can digest a surprising amount of nonsense when it needs to. There are accounts of prisoners of war boiling leather boots with crushed chalk to create a kind of glue gruel. In the Japanese internment camps during World War II, detainees made jelly from boiled weeds and shoe polish. Not for flavour, for form. Anything to trick the mouth into thinking food had texture. Layers. Density. You chew a second crayon, blue this time, and notice how your teeth leave perfect chalky impressions. You wonder if this will stain your mouth. Wouldn't that be something? A starving person with rainbow teeth. The kind of thing historians would chuckle about in dusty classrooms one day. As you sit there, chewing your way through art supplies, you realise how thin the line really is between edible and not, between food and object. It's a moving target, a sliding scale based on how long it's been since your last real meal. Right now, wax is food. So are pine needles. So is the bark flour in a damp tin behind the stove. And so are the half-dozen things you haven't eaten yet, but are seriously considering. You pause between crayons and light the smallest candle you have left. The flame flickers weakly, more symbolic than useful, but it helps, just a little. The light dances on the walls, casting weird shadows that look like movement, like company. You let yourself pretend for a minute that you're not alone, that there's someone else here chewing wax with you, telling stories about how ridiculous this is. You sip hot water, made from melted snow, no pine this time, just plain. Neutral, and somehow that's more comforting. You swish it around your mouth to get rid of the crayon aftertaste. It sort of works. There's a moment, quiet and still, where you feel almost human again. A ridiculous human, sure, but still one with habits, preferences, routines. You've created something like a meal. You've consumed calories. You've bought yourself a few more hours, maybe a day. That's what this game is now, calories as currency. Every weird thing you eat is a small transaction with death, a way of saying, not today, and you know this won't last. You can't live on crayons and candles forever, but that's not the point. The point is, you live through today, you solve the problem of today, that counts for something. You tuck the remaining crayons back in the box and slide it into your coat pocket. You'll ration them, carefully. Maybe colour something with one before eating it, just to stay ridiculous, just to stay you. The wax sits heavy in your stomach, but it sits. That's enough. You blow out the candle, wrap yourself in blankets, and close your eyes. Let tomorrow come. It starts with your gums. A strange tightness, like someone tugging at your teeth from the inside. Then comes the bleeding. Not dramatic, not gory, just a pink streak on your toothbrush, a metallic tang when you press your tongue to the roof of your mouth. You run your finger along your gum line and wince. It's tender, puffy, like a bruise trying to escape. You look in the mirror, what's left of one, and see the damage. Your gums are retreating, backing away from your teeth like they've just remembered they don't belong there. You know what this is. You knew it was coming. You've been expecting it, dreading it, pretending it might skip you like a missed appointment. But here it is, the old enemy, ancient and absurd in its cruelty. Scurvy. It sounds like a pirate problem, right? Something from dusty textbooks and Halloween costumes. You picture a bearded sailor with bad posture muttering about limes. But no, scurvy is real. It's here, and it wants your teeth. You sit down slowly, one hand over your mouth, as if that'll hold everything in place. You try to remember how much vitamin C you've had since winter began. A few pine needle teas, some fermented apple slices. Not much. Not nearly enough. Your body's quietly been keeping score, and now it's throwing up flags. Historically, this was the silent killer of the cold season. Not frostbite, not starvation, but a vitamin deficiency. It sounds so technical, so fixable. Just eat a few oranges, they say. But there are no oranges here. No citrus. No grocery store. Just snow, bark, and a jaw that feels like it's thinking about quitting. During the great sailing eras of the 1600s and 1700s, scurvy wiped out more sailors than battle or shipwreck. Crews would set out with barrels of salted meat and hardtack and return months later with a third of their number and a graveyard's worth of loose teeth. Legs would swell. Wounds wouldn't heal. Gums would blacken. There are journal entries describing sailors screaming as their teeth dropped into their stew bowls. You're not there yet. But you see the path ahead. You open the jar of fermented apples. They're your last known source of C. You sip the brine like it's holy water. It burns your sore gums, but you don't care. You swirl it in your mouth, hoping the contact alone will do something. Heal something. Your body responds with a kind of desperate gratitude. A flicker of strength. A whisper. More of this, please. But there is no more. You pick through your stores like a raccoon, frantic, hopeful. You shake empty tins, sniff dried herbs, check under cloth for something forgotten. Nothing. You even consider the tiny wedge of lemon-scented soap by the sink. You turn it over in your hand. It smells promising. But it's fake, synthetic, perfumed for illusion. Not nutrition, not help. You pause, then go outside. You head for the pine trees. Pine needles have vitamin C. You've read that. You've made tea from them before. Not tasty, but potentially life-saving. You snip a handful of green needles, avoiding the brown ones. Inside, you chop them fine and drop them into hot water. The smell fills the cabin, sharp, clean, a little medicinal. You sip slowly, forcing it past your swollen gums. This is how the First Nations people saved scurvy-stricken explorers in Canada. They didn't have oranges. They had conifers. They taught the desperate Europeans how to make needle tea. It probably saved more lives than any medicine at the time. But of course, the credit rarely went to them. That's the pattern. You take another sip and close your eyes, trying to feel it working. Trying to feel anything. The ache in your mouth is dull now, but constant. You chew a few softened needles for good measure. They taste like wood and sadness. There's a theory that some ancient populations survived harsh winters almost entirely because of fermentation. Sauerkraut, pickled roots, and fish packed in brine gave just enough sea to keep death at bay. In the Arctic, Inuit diets, rich in raw organ meat and whale blubber, kept scurvy from taking hold. Raw seal liver apparently is a vitamin C goldmine. Not exactly something you have lying around. The debate continues among scholars. Why did some civilizations suffer from scurvy while others didn't? Was it diet, culture, luck? Some say genetics may have played a role, that certain populations adapted better. Others argue it was pure geography. If you lived somewhere you could store fresh produce or preserve meat well, you had a chance. If not, well, your teeth didn't stand a chance either. You run your tongue along your teeth again. They're still there, wiggly maybe, but there, for now. You finish the tea, scraping the bottom of the cup with your spoon, like there's a prize hiding there. You suck the last bits of boiled pine needle from between your molars and wonder if tomorrow will be better or worse. You lie down on your cot and pull the blanket up to your chin. The fire is dying again. You don't move to fix it. Not yet. You're conserving energy. You think about pirates and 18th century sailors and all the people who lost their lives not to war or wolves, but to a lack of fruit. You imagine how nice an orange would taste right now, how the juice would sting your gums in the best way, how the pulp would slide down your throat like sunshine. You imagine peeling one slowly, watching the mist spray from the skin, the scent of citrus curling through the air like a rescue rope. You know it's a fantasy, but your body believes it. Somewhere in your bloodstream, cells are perking up like plants in spring. You close your eyes, mouth burning faintly, and whisper the words you've been saying for weeks now. Not today. You've crossed into that strange, quiet territory where even rot starts looking like potential. Where mold is no longer a warning sign but a suggestion. Maybe, just maybe, something useful is growing there. You notice it today, peeking out from the corner of the shelf, like a fuzzy little miracle, a chunk of bread you thought was gone, buried under a cloth, blue and green and thriving in a way you're not. You don't recoil, you lean in. It smells sharp, earthy, almost sweet, like mushrooms and wet pennies and whatever the underside of survival smells like. You pick it up gently, like it might fall apart, or sprout legs and scurry. The texture is both soft and firm, the crust still clinging to some semblance of structure. This used to be food, and it still might be. In a different time, you would have tossed it without thought. In a different time, you wouldn't be considering whether scraping the mold off is enough. But here and now, in this cabin-sized waiting room between hunger and spring, you're willing to listen to what the mold has to say. People have done worse, much worse. Mold, after all, isn't always the enemy. It's fickle, it's moody, sometimes dangerous, sometimes medicinal. In ancient China, mouldy soybean curd was used to treat skin infections. In medieval Europe, mouldy bread was pressed into wounds, not because they understood antibiotics, but because empirically it sometimes helped. Fast forward a few centuries and penicillin emerges from mould on a petri dish, saving millions. One kind of rot becomes the saviour of humankind. You think of blue cheese with its veiny streaks and aggressive personality. People eat that on purpose. They even pay extra for it. That mould is cultivated, chosen, celebrated. So why not this? You take a knife and begin to slice, carefully, like you're diffusing a bomb. The mould comes off in feathery clumps, leaving behind a slightly stained but recognisable hunk of bread. You sniff it again. Still smells like food, sort of. You toast it on a flat stone near the fire just to be safe, or to feel safer. Heat kills things, or at least quiets them. As it crisps, the smell changes, mellowing, warming. You tear a piece off and nibble. It's dry, obviously, tough. but your stomach perks up like a dog hearing kibble. It's edible. To that, you've created breakfast. You think about how many people have asked this same question in darker winters. To survival lore and kitchen wisdom is sometimes, if it's hard cheese, hard bread, something solid, it might be safe. You nod to yourself. You've always been cautious. You know not to mess with mold. Who knows anymore? You finish your toast. You feel, for the first time in days, like you've stolen something back from death. Like you tricked it. Trenches. Soldiers scraping mold from damp biscuits. Boiling them into a kind of gluey porridge just to avoid wasting calories. Or Russian peasants during the long starvation winters of the 1930s, where spoiled milk was turned into a lumpy cheese spread, and bread, no matter how green, was sacred. You once read about a French village that survived a brutal winter entirely off mouldy rye and old wine. The mould made some of them sick. Hallucinations, even seizures. But the alternative was death. Some historians suspect the mould was ergot, a fungus with hallucinogenic properties. They called it St. Anthony's fire. It burned their minds but kept their bodies alive. That's the kind of trade you start weighing when the snow doesn't stop falling. You check your pantry again, slowly, respectfully. Looking now not just for food, but for the beginnings of it. A white fuzz on the edge of a jam lid. A soft bloom on a carrot you thought was gone. These are not signs of ruin anymore. These are signals. Warnings, yes, but also invitations. If you're smart, if you're desperate. The weird thing is, part of you wants to understand it better. Mold. Bacteria. The things that break food down and sometimes build it up again. It's like there's a parallel universe living on your shelves, and now you're starting to speak its language. You boil a pot of water and toss in the mouldy crusts you scraped off. Not to eat, just to experiment. You wonder what they'll smell like, what they'll do. Maybe you'll skim off the foam. Maybe you'll taste the broth. Or maybe you're just bored. Hunger does that. It turns you into a chemist, a gambler, a mad scientist with a weak stomach. You pull your blanket tighter and sit by the fire, watching the mould tea bubble gently. You have no plans to drink it, yet, but you want to see it, to witness it, to learn something. The truth is, mould is part of the food cycle. It signals change. Decay, sure, but also transformation. Wine is just spoiled grape juice done right. Cheese is milk held hostage by mould and bacteria until it becomes something worth loving. Bread, too. Yeast is just a friendlier kind of fungus, rising to the occasion. You start wondering what else in your house could be transformed. The last of the dried fruit, maybe? That weird root you found frozen under the snow last week? You think about burying it in brine, letting time work on it. You're not just eating anymore. You're foraging in reverse, mining the past for what might still be usable. You're not surviving off freshness. You're surviving off the edge of rot. And somehow there's power in that. In knowing that what used to mean waste now means hope. That mould on bread, if it doesn't kill you, might just keep you from going under. You let the broth cool. You don't drink it, not today, but you save it. Because in this winter, even mould has a role to play. There's no avoiding it anymore. You're going to have to go outside. Not just to the shed or the snowbank pantry or the tree where you occasionally stare at bark like it's a menu, but out, beyond your clearing, into the woods, into that soft white silence where your breath becomes a cloud and your body becomes a bargaining chip. You don't want to. You've been delaying it for days, even as the food dwindled and the cabin air got thick with vinegar and old smoke and something vaguely rodent-like. But it's February now, or close enough, and the rations you cobble together are flirting with zero. You're down to weird crusts, waxy regrets, and the final few bark biscuits that crumble like regret. So you get dressed, layer by layer, like armour, wool, canvas, threadbare socks stacked like the pages of a too-thin book, boots stiff from yesterday's melting snow, gloves that barely qualify anymore, more like finger-shaped holes pretending to be protection. You step outside and the cold hits like a slap, though you've grown too used to it to flinch. The snow is waist-deep in places, crusted on top but soft underneath, so every step is a gamble. You've got a walking stick, mostly for balance, partly to pretend you're not one wrong step from disappearing into a drift. The goal today is simple: forage. And yes, it's a joke to even think of foraging in the dead of winter when everything's frozen or buried or dead. But people have done it before, and they've lived to tell the story. So now it's your turn to go digging through the frostbitten junk drawer of nature to see if it left anything behind. First, you head to the old grove where you remember wild onions growing last year. They're long gone now, obviously, but maybe, you can find the remnants. Some frozen bulbs under the snow, deep in the mud if you dig far enough. You kneel, chip away at the icy crust and start pulling handfuls of snow, then frozen earth. It's slow. Your fingers go numb within minutes, even through gloves. But eventually you find something, a small shriveled root. It looks like a finger from a doll, ugly and bony, but it smells faintly oniony when you crush it between your fingers. You pocket it. A win. Barely. In 17th century Finland, people were forced to dig through snow to find frozen lichen and the base of cattail plants. They made a kind of porridge out of the cattail rhizomes, boiled, mashed, strained through cloth. Bland, fibrous, hard to digest. But it worked. It filled. In Japan's coldest regions, people used to forage burdock root and frozen fern sprouts from beneath the snowdrifts, chipping away at the frozen soil like prospectors mining for edible treasure. You are now officially part of that lineage, the frost foragers. You move farther into the woods. It's quiet in a way that doesn't feel peaceful, just empty. There's no bird song, no rustle. Every step you take sounds impossibly loud. You're carrying a bag just in case the universe decides to reward your optimism, and strangely, it kind of does. Near the base of an old spruce, you spot a cluster of mushrooms, half buried in snow. They're stiff, pale, and definitely not fresh. But you recognise the type. Birch polypores. Technically not delicious, not even close, but not poisonous either. You pry a few off the bark, careful not to slip. They squeak when they come loose. You know from your occasional reading and YouTube-fueled survival curiosity that these mushrooms have been used for centuries, not just as food, but as medicine, and even fire starters. Ötzi the Iceman, the mummy found in the Alps, was carrying one on a leather strap. If it was good enough for a frozen prehistoric guy, it's good enough for you. You wrap the mushrooms in cloth and continue. There's another hour of slow tramping, chipping away at frozen patches of ground, looking under downed logs, peeking into the hollows where snow doesn't settle as deep. You find pine cones. Not fresh, not juicy, but maybe still good for harvesting a few seeds. You also find an old squirrel stash. Nuts, mostly empty, but a few shells rattle with potential. Another win. You feel like a raccoon stealing from a raccoon, which is honestly fine. You're not looking for gourmet. You're looking for calories, scraps of protein, traces of anything that reminds your stomach it still has a job. There's a moment kneeling under a snow-heavy branch where you find a patch of frozen rose hips, those bright red berries that outlast the cold if the birds haven't eaten them. You pluck them carefully. They're soft, wrinkled, but not rotted. You almost cry. Vitamin C bombs. You suck one slowly like candy. It's sour, sharp, and wonderful. It's also possibly full of tiny seeds that will shred your insides if you're not careful, so you spit the seeds into the snow and make a note to strain the rest if you boil them later. Small price to pay. Back in the cabin, hours later, you empty your findings like treasure onto the table. 2 rose hips, 1 sad root, 5 pine nuts, a handful of mushroom caps, a bit of bark that looks promising. You feel like a kid showing off their first science project. You make soup. Not a rich soup, not even a real soup. But you boil water, add everything you've got, crush it down with your spoon, and let the scent rise. It smells like forest breath. Bitter, earthy, clean. You strain it into your mug and drink slowly, eyes closed. As if you're sipping a 1,000-year-old recipe. It's not filling, not even close. But it tastes like effort, like movement, like proof that you're still in the game. Foraging in the dead of winter isn't just about food. It's about shaking the feeling that the season owns you, that you're just sitting around waiting to starve. It's about agency, about saying I'm still here, I still have hands, I still remember how to find things that grow beneath snow. You sit by the fire, wrapped in blankets, belly still empty but heart weirdly full. You toast your mug to the room and whisper, "To the squirrel who left those nuts behind. Thank you." You hear them before you see them. Boots crunching through snow, a rhythm too heavy, too measured for animals. You freeze mid-chew, mouth half full of a bark cracker spread with rehydrated mushroom paste, staring at the door like it might burst open. For a few terrifying seconds, your entire body becomes a tuning fork. Then you hear voices, low, male, close. You put the food down carefully and crawl toward the window, slow and quiet, heart thudding like a drum beat in your ears. You peek through a gap in the curtain, just enough to see the silhouettes. 3 figures moving down the trail that leads past your cabin. Big coats, beards, something slung over their shoulders. You can't tell what. Rifles? Sacks? You squint and pull back. It doesn't matter. You recognize the walk, the pace. Not neighbours, not friendly, not safe. You blow out the candle and flatten yourself against the floor, body pressed to the boards, listening hard. They pass by. One of them says something and laughs, a hard, empty sound. You don't catch the words, but the tone is enough. They're out here for the same reason you are. Hunger. Maybe they were decent once. Farmers, tradesmen, teachers. Maybe, like you, they started the winter with a plan, a pantry, a system. But plans rot like anything else. And now they've gone hollow, hollow-eyed, hollow-bellied, hollow-hearted. You don't move until the sound of footsteps fades completely. Then you wait longer. 5 minutes. 10. You sit up slowly, staring at the closed door, knowing full well it could open at any moment. They didn't knock. They didn't try the handle. That's something. A blessing, maybe. Or maybe they'll come back later. But the message is clear. The hunger isn't just inside you anymore. It's walking on 2 feet. It's knocking on doors. You double-check your lock, just a wooden bar, but it holds. You shove a chair against the door too, just in case. Then you look at your stash, your inventory. If they'd come in, they'd have seen nothing. A few scraps, a pot, a fire, not worth killing over. Probably, but you can't be sure. Hunger makes people stop calculating properly. Historically, this is the stage where things start to fracture. The point in the winter where neighbour turns on neighbour, and the unspoken code of rural life, share, barter, protect, starts to erode. You've read about it. In the diaries from the Dutch famine during World War II, families wrote about locking their doors for the first time in generations, not from soldiers, from other civilians, starving children, crazed mothers, men who used to smile and wave at the market. In early colonial settlements, winter theft was punishable by death. Harsh? Maybe. But consider what it meant. If someone stole your food, they weren't just endangering themselves. They were sentencing your whole family to starvation. And so, the gallows came out. Not for murder, for stealing bread. You sit down again and take a long breath. You're not a violent person. You never have been. But you reach for the axe by the door and place it a little closer. Not dramatically, just within reach, just in case. You try to return to your meal. The bark cracker is cold now. The mushroom paste has congealed into a sort of forest glue. You take a bite anyway. Chew slowly. Try not to taste the fear. There's a tradition in parts of the Balkans, deep in mountain villages, where families would create hunger pacts before winter. Agreements between households. We'll share if you'll share. We'll help if you'll help. And if one family breaks the pact, hoards, steals, disappears, the others turn against them, cut them off, sometimes literally. It sounds medieval, but it isn't. The last documented one was in the 1980s. The truth is, hunger rearranges morality. It redraws the lines between right and wrong, generous and foolish, cautious and cruel. You used to believe you'd never steal from someone else. Now you're not so sure. If you were walking past a cabin and smelled stew, real stew, what would you do? What would you be capable of? You remember once trading a cracked mug for half a sweet potato. The woman who gave it to you looked like a skeleton wrapped in wool, but she smiled. She'd said, "I can't drink anything too hot anymore." Burns my throat. You wonder where she is now, if she made it. You think about what you have left to trade. Not much. A few strips of dried meat, a tiny lump of salt, some pine needle bundles you've tied into little sachets for tea. Would anyone want those? Could they save you? You also think about what someone might take. The axe, the last candle, the firewood. You've never had to defend anything with violence. You hope you never will. But you feel it now, sitting in your chest like a coiled wire. The knowing, the willingness, if it came to it. There's an old legend from the Alps, told in the worst winters, about a creature that visits homes pretending to be a neighbour in need. It knocks softly, calls you by name, asks for soup. If you let it in, it eats you. If you refuse, it curses your house with ice. The moral was clear. Trust wisely, because not every knock means help. Sometimes it's hunger wearing someone else's skin. You lock your eyes on the door and listen again. Nothing. But you'll remember this moment. The first day, hunger came on two legs, with voices, with boots. You put out the fire to avoid drawing attention. The cold rushes in like a reminder. Later, you'll relight it. Later, you'll eat again. But for now, you sit in the dark, watching shadows move across the windows. The next knock might not be a choice. You never thought you'd break into a church. Not just because it felt morally wrong, though it does, but because you assumed it wouldn't come to this. You assumed there'd be a last-minute solution. A thaw, a miracle, but the snow hasn't melted, the sky hasn't changed. And your stomach is now an open wound that aches with every breath. So you break in. It's not dramatic. No shattered stained glass or kicked-in doors. Just a slow push on the back entrance of the chapel, where the lock rusted through sometime during the third week of snow. You step inside, careful not to let the door creak too loudly. The silence in here isn't the sacred kind. It's the hollow kind, like everything inside has been waiting, quietly, for something to happen. You pause, letting your eyes adjust to the dim light. The sanctuary smells like dust, old paper, and frozen wood. No candles burn, no incense. Just a row of empty pews and a pulpit dressed in faded cloth. You walk slowly, footsteps echoing too loudly off the high stone walls. You've been here before, weddings, funerals. A few hesitant Christmas Eve services when you were still pretending to believe in something. But now you're not here for faith. You're here for food. The kitchen is down the hall, a small annex built on decades ago for potlucks and funerals. You remember the smell of ham sandwiches in this hallway, of weak coffee and casseroles. You let that memory carry you forward. You push open the kitchen door and stop. It's been picked over, stripped mostly. Empty cans in the corner, a few dented pots, but not completely barren. There's a box on the shelf, plain cardboard, worn at the corners. You pull it down and open it slowly. Inside, rice. Real rice. Maybe a pound or two. White grains, dry, intact. You close your eyes and feel a rush of something like hope and something like shame. You should leave it. It's not yours, but it's also not anyone's. The church is empty. Everyone's gone or hiding, or worse. You've seen no smoke from the steeple chimney in weeks. No footprints but your own. And still, you hesitate. You think about how people used to come here to pray for rain, for harvests, for children. Now you're here praying for calories. You can almost hear your grandmother's voice in your head. God helps those who help themselves. You're pretty sure she used that to justify stealing pies once. Now you're using it to justify taking rice. You check the shelves again. There's more. A few cans of beets. A sealed jar of molasses, long forgotten. A tin of powdered milk. You feel giddy, like you've just robbed a bank and gotten away with it. But you also feel something else, something colder. This was meant to be shared. A community storehouse. A place of last resort. You don't know who stocked it, but you know they probably did it with others in mind. You're not stealing from a store. You're stealing from the ghost of generosity. And still, you scoop the rice into a sack, take the milk and leave the beets. You leave a note. You don't know why. A torn scrap of paper with shaking handwriting. Took food. Left half. Thank you. You tuck it into the box and push it back on the shelf. Maybe someone will read it. Maybe no one will. You walk back into the sanctuary before you go, just for a moment. The light through the frosted windows casts long stripes across the aisle. You sit in the back pew. Your stomach growls loud in the silence like it's mocking the reverence. You think about all the people who've prayed here over the years. Farmers with bad harvests, parents with sick kids, soldiers before war. You wonder what they think of you now, dressed in rags, stealing rice from the house of God. You try a prayer, but it gets stuck in your throat. Not because you don't believe, not because you do, but because it feels strange. You're not asking for rescue, not really. You're asking for permission, and maybe a little forgiveness. You leave quietly, pulling the door shut behind you until it clicks. Back in the cabin, you cook the rice slowly. You use snowmelt water, stir gently with the back of your spoon. No seasoning. Just starch and steam and the kind of warmth that fills the air, not just your belly. It smells incredible. You take a spoonful and nearly cry. It's soft, bland, real. The texture alone is enough to fool your body into thinking you've feasted. You eat half, pack the rest away. The powdered milk will last a while, if you're careful. You can make rice porridge. You can boil it into a soup base. This might stretch for days, weeks even. But then the fear creeps in. What if they come back? What if someone else was counting on that rice? What if they find your note and don't care? What if they track your prints back to the cabin? You smooth out the snow around your door, erase the trail, you put a blanket over the window, you keep the fire low. That night you dream of stained glass and rice rain, of candles that burn food instead of wax, of pews lined with bread instead of people. You wake to silence. Full, for the first time in weeks, but not free from guilt. You whisper, just in case God's still listening, "I'm sorry, but thank you." You don't mean to start rationing differently, but it happens the moment you catch your reflection. Just a glance, quick, unplanned, in the cracked window pane that's half frosted over, but enough to see what's changed. Your face looks hollow, not just thin, but drained, cheeks sunken, lips cracked, and your eyes. Your eyes don't quite look like yours anymore, they're older, edgeless, and somehow smaller, as if retreating from the world around them. You barely recognize the shape staring back at you, and yet you know exactly who it is. That's when you make the decision. The kids eat first. It's instinct more than logic. It's primal, not heroic. You don't feel noble. You just know, without question, that if there's only one more bowl of rice, it won't go to you. If there's a spoonful of powdered milk left, it goes to them. This isn't a memory. This is a projection. A reality you inhabit alone but carry like company. You don't have children in the cabin with you, at least not anymore. Maybe they were never here at all. Maybe they were always part of a plan that didn't pan out, but now they are as present as your own ribs pressing against your shirt. You speak to them sometimes, out loud. You serve them first. You smile in their direction. You chew more slowly when you imagine they're watching. And this is not madness. It's survival. History has proven this over and over again, that when winter tightens its grip and food disappears, parents and parent-shaped people start prioritizing the little ones. Even if those children are imaginary, even if they're long gone, even if it's just one last grip on purpose in a world that's shrinking. During the Holodomor, Ukraine's famine in the 1930s, there were entire villages where mothers fed their children every last crumb of bread, while they themselves withered in silence. The mothers would distract them with stories while secretly skipping their own meals. They'd smile while cooking empty pots, pretend to chew when the food was gone, and fold themselves away like dried paper dolls. In the Warsaw, parents to give children the only ration of soup, and then later drink water just to feel the weight of something in their belly. Starve, but shield. There's a letter you once read, written by a mother during the Dutch famine of 1944. It said, "I no longer think of hunger as pain. It's a quiet now, a silence. I keep the bread for them. Watching them eat is the closest I come to feeling full." That sentence lives rent-free in your mind, gives you a strange kind of sometimes, a soft, fading giggle that you might be inventing. A cup you found under the sink. You stir in a spoonful of powdered milk, thinned with melted snow. You add a few pine nuts you saved from the squirrel stash. Then you place it on the table in the spot across from yours, around the bowl, and the girl, tiny, quiet, blinking slowly, always blinking, and you let yourself think that they are warm now, that you gave them something. You drink hot water for yourself. No bark today, no broth, just warmth. Somewhere in the quiet, you remember stories from Native American tribes, like the Inuit and the Cree, where food was always offered to the children first. In some cases, even imaginary children, spirit children, symbolic of the tribe's future. In the darkest parts of winter, food was placed at small shrines or hearths, not just as tradition, but as hope. A message to the world. We're still here. We believe in tomorrow. You understand that now in your bones. Even in ancient Rome during sieges, families would boil down bones to extract every last nutrient. But always, the children ate first. One senator reportedly starved himself over weeks so his son could grow strong enough to escape. History didn't remember his name, but the sun lived. That was enough. You wonder if these moments are what define a civilization, how we choose to spend our last calories, whether we hoard or share, whether we shrink inward or reach out with empty hands. You spend the rest of the day moving slowly, quietly, whispering little things under your breath. You read from a book out loud like story time. You open the window just a crack to let in a breeze and pretend it's a voice returning your call. When you eat again, just a bark biscuit and the last bit of fermented apple. You chew slowly, eyes closed, pretending it's cake. You pretend the children are full, that they're asleep now, breathing softly, that the cabin is warm, that you're not alone. And again, you're not sure if this is delusion or survival, but you've decided it doesn't matter. Because for the first time in a long time, you feel anchored. You feel tethered to something, not just to survival, but to meaning. You lie down next to the fire, its glow soft on your face, and whisper a small promise to the shadows. I'll go last. You've been sitting still too long enough that your limbs feel heavy, like they belong to someone else, someone slower, someone deeper into winter than you realized. You try to stand, but the motion feels strange, like waking from a dream in the wrong body. Your knees wobble, your vision narrows. You grab the table for balance, your fingers fumbling over its edge like they've forgotten what holding feels like. It's not just weakness now, it's something else, something deeper. The hunger has gone past growling, past pain. It's gone quiet, and that's what scares you. You've read enough about this to know where you are. The final stage of starvation, the calm before the storm. You're not hungry anymore because your body stopped asking. It knows there's no point. It's conserving what little is left, prioritizing only the organs that matter. You're becoming a hierarchy of function. The mind goes next. You sit down hard and try to remember what day it is. No answer. How long since you last left the cabin? You don't know. Was it yesterday you went to the church? Or last week? It could have been a month ago. Time has unravelled into something soft and unreliable. Your thoughts feel slippery, not gone, just distant, like your brain is on a delay. You think something, but it reaches you seconds later, like a letter mailed from inside your own skull. You try to hold on to simple things, your name, where you are, the children, no, the memory of them, the idea of them, the promise you made. I'll go last. You're still keeping it, but you're running out of last to go. You lie back against the wall, wrapped in all the blankets you can find, watching the light move across the floor. It's barely there. The sun has decided to show up in pale streaks, casting long, cold shadows that feel more symbolic than warm. You know this stage. History knows it too. Accounts from survivors of sieges and death marches and gulags all mention this moment. The point where the body stops fighting and the mind starts floating. Hollow men, they call them. Hollow-eyed, hollow-voiced, moving like ghosts in their own skin. You're starting to understand how someone can sit down in the snow and never get back up. Not out of drama or despair, but because standing just doesn't make sense anymore. In 1943, during the Warsaw Ghetto starvation, witnesses describe people leaning against walls for hours, not asleep, not dead, just paused, as if life was buffering. They'd stare at things that weren't there, reach for food they hadn't had in days, smile at strangers who weren't real. You don't feel like smiling, but you do, just to see if you can. Your face muscles complain, but they still work. Barely. There's a theory among some fringe historians that starvation unlocks something in the mind, some primal backdoor, that once you're past the pain, you slip into a kind of euphoria. They called it the fasting high. Prisoners in Siberia wrote about it. One said, "My body was dead, but my mind walked beside me like a friend. I wasn't afraid anymore." You don't feel euphoric, but you feel untethered, light, in a way that has nothing to do with weight. You drift in and out of something like sleep, but not quite. A twilight where the past and present start to blur. Your memories start rising like smoke. A bowl of soup in your grandmother's kitchen. The crunch of leaves under your boots during an autumn hike. The sweet sting of orange juice on a scraped tongue. These things feel more real than the blankets around you. You let them come. You start talking to yourself softly without realizing it. Narrating the day as if you're still in motion. "There's enough snowmelt for tea. We'll ration the rice, just one spoonful. Don't forget to stir the pot, it burns if you leave it." But there is no tea. There is no pot on the fire. There is no fire. You haven't lit one in hours, maybe a day. You're too tired. Still, you hold your rituals. You roll over and reach for the spoon. It's beside you on the floor, right where you left it. You trace its shape with your thumb like a rosary bead. A small, comforting object that reminds you you're still tethered to something real. You close your eyes and whisper, "Just keep going." In World War I trenches, soldiers wrote letters that made no sense. Scribbles, repetitions. They weren't crazy, not exactly. Just starved. Just hollow. They'd misspell their own names. Forget who the letter was for, but they'd keep writing, because writing was movement. It meant you were still here. You think about writing something, a final message. But what would it say? Still trying? It's okay. Save the rice for the children. You smile again. That same weak flicker of amusement. You don't even have paper left. You used it all for kindling weeks ago. The cabin is darker now. The sun's gone behind the hill. You pull the blanket tighter and shift onto your side. You're still cold. You're always cold. But your body doesn't shiver anymore. It's done with drama. It's doing the quiet math of how much energy you have left. You try to list 5 things you'd eat right now if they appeared in front of you. You get stuck after 3. Mashed potatoes, fresh bread, a fried egg. You pause. You can't think of 4 or 5. The mind won't cooperate. It's wandering again. You see the children, just for a moment, sitting at the table, finishing their bowl. They don't speak, but they look at you with warm eyes, like they understand. You nod. Your body aches, but it's not afraid. You've kept your promise. And now, you rest. You're not sure what woke you, or how long it's been since you last opened your eyes. The world is blurry at first, a smear of frost and wood grain and shadow. You blink slowly, the lid sticking slightly, your lashes rimmed in ice. Your body is stiff but not in pain, just muted, like the volume's been turned down on everything. You feel lighter than usual, not better, just less. And then you hear it. A sound outside, a small deliberate crunch of snow, then another. Not the wild thump of branches or the careless scurry of squirrels, but a pattern. Slow, two-legged. Your body responds before your brain catches up. A flicker of adrenaline, small and sluggish, but still enough to nudge you upright. Your hands reach automatically for the axe by the door. It's frozen to the floor. You pull gently, carefully. It comes loose with a small sigh of splintered wood. You hold your breath. More steps now, closer. You creep toward the window, keeping low, heart ticking like a slow metronome. You ease back the curtain just a sliver and peer through. And there they are. A man, mid-40s maybe. Heavy coat, dark beard, limp in one leg. He's dragging something behind him. A sled, makeshift, piled with a bundle covered in tarp. His head turns slowly, eyes scanning. You duck down before he sees you. Another figure emerges behind him. Thinner, smaller, younger. Maybe a son. Maybe not. They don't speak. Just move like ghosts. Quiet. Practiced. Tired. They stop just yards from your cabin. The man kneels beside the sled and opens the tarp. You risk another glance and feel your breath catch. It's meat. Or what used to be meat. You can't tell from here. Frozen, bloody, wrapped in fabric. But unmistakably food. Real food. Enough for days. Maybe weeks. Enough to make you feel the kind of hunger you haven't felt in days. The old kind. The sharp, gnawing kind that tightens your gut and curls your toes. Your body remembers, and then your brain catches up. Because the meat, it's shaped wrong. Too long. Too human. You jerk back from the window, heart now thudding for real. You press your back to the wall and squeeze your eyes shut. You don't want to see. You don't want to know. But you do. The rumours were always there. Always whispered in the darker corners of history, especially when the cold stayed too long and the food ran too short. You told yourself those were stories. The worst-case nightmares. Not real. Not something you would ever see. But here it is. Just a few yards away. You think of the Donner Party. Stranded in the Sierra Nevada in 1846. Families reduced to eating the dead. Some did it quietly with shame. Others argued over who got the liver. There were survivors, but no heroes. You think of Leningrad. Almost 3 years of siege. Parents choosing which child to feed. Others disappearing entirely. The official records say they starved. The unofficial ones say otherwise. And of course, there's the Andes flight disaster. The plane crash survivors, 72 days on a frozen mountainside, no food, no help, just snow and silence and bodies. They waited as long as they could. Then they cut strips from the dead and lived. There's a fringe theory, unverified, uncomfortable, that cannibalism was more common in pre-modern winters than we like to admit. That in the isolated corners of the world where help didn't come and neighbours vanished, it wasn't always wolves at the door. Sometimes it was just the cold, wearing a human face. You grip the axe tighter, not out of judgment, not even fear, out of understanding. Because if the meat is what you think it is, and they're carrying it willingly, they're past shame. They've made their choice. They've stepped over a line. You hear the younger one speak. Just one word. Can't make it out. The older man answers softly. Then they cover the bundle again. Pull the tarp tight. Rest a moment. And then they turn toward your cabin. Your heart skips. You back away from the window, clutching the axe, breath shallow. You don't know if they saw you. You don't know what they want. Maybe they're just passing by. Maybe they're looking for shelter. Or maybe they're out of food again, and you look like opportunity. You step back toward the fire pit and glance around the room. No light, no smoke. Good. You left no trail. Maybe they'll pass. But the steps come closer. You think about opening the door first, stepping outside, speaking like a human before things go dark. You think about offering something. People had to make impossible decisions. The siege of Marat in the First Crusade, where even the soldiers wrote home in horror after consuming the bodies of the dead. The Jamestown colony, the Ukrainian famine, the ice-locked villages of northern Russia. Survival doesn't always look like courage. Sometimes it looks like cruelty wearing hunger's mask. There's a knock. Gentle. One time. You freeze. The axe still in your hand. You stare at the door like it might open itself. Then, silence. Long enough that you wonder if you imagined it. Another knock. Slower. Then footsteps. Fading. You wait. 10 minutes. Maybe more. Eventually you look again. They're gone. The trail winds back into the trees. The sled now lighter. The tarp tighter. The meat still with them. You exhale. But you don't feel relief. You feel recognition. Because now, deep in your gut, you understand something you didn't want to before. You're not just afraid of them. You're afraid of how close you are to becoming them. After they leave, you sit still for hours, barely moving, as if any shift in weight might collapse the fragile barrier between you and the decision they've already made. Your breath is shallow, your mind slow, but not empty, just full of one long thought stretched thin. Not yet, not yet, not yet. You can't stop picturing it though. The shape under the tarp, the way they moved it, gently, like it meant something. The look in the older man's eyes as he glanced toward your window, as if he already knew someone was watching. You're haunted less by the horror of what they carried, and more by the fact that they survived, that they still had the strength to walk, to drag a sled through snow, to knock. You couldn't have answered even if you'd wanted to. You're not strong enough to open the door. Still, something changed. Their visit lit a small, cold fire under your thoughts. You're awake again, sharpened by fear or jealousy, or the terrible knowledge that survival may no longer have anything to do with warmth or planning or even luck. It might come down to what you're willing to do. You take stock of yourself, physically, mentally, what's left of you. You've got a few spoonfuls of rice, a couple pine nuts, a thin broth made from mushroom stems and boiled bark that you've already reheated 3 times. It smells like wet furniture. You drink it anyway. And then, as if cued by fate or some cruel trick of memory, you start thinking about the old rituals, the things people used to do, not just to stay alive, but to feel like they were alive. The rituals of pretending to be full, the games people played with their own minds. You dig out your old coat, your good one, worn thin at the elbows but still whole, and put it on, just to feel its weight. Then you set the table, slowly, a plate, a cup, the spoon. You place a rag in your lap and sit as if company might arrive. As if dinner might be served. You're not mocking yourself. You're not cracking under pressure. You're choosing something, anything to keep the hollow from spreading. You sit like you remember sitting at family dinners, straight-backed, expectant. And for a moment, something shifts. You feel human again, not fed, but present. This is what people did in concentration camps, in prison barracks, in famine zones. They dressed for meals with no food. They set tables with no dishes. They sang lullabies to their own hunger. In medieval times, monks fasting for religious reasons would pass wooden bowls of imaginary stew down long tables, pretending to eat together. They knew it was nothing, but they believed in the shape of the ritual, and somehow that belief kept them going. You begin chewing slowly, air only, as though biting into soft bread. You add a few sounds, a sigh, a murmur, a fake swallow. It's absurd, but it works. You fool yourself into the feeling of eating. Your mouth waters, your belly, confused, twitches. For a minute the room feels full, and then it passes, but the quiet stays. You begin whispering stories to yourself, old ones, tales of feasts from books. You describe them out loud: boar roasted over fire, pears soaked in honey, potatoes slathered in butter. You go into detail, the crackle, the juices, the warmth. Your voice is hoarse, but steady. You've become your own campfire storyteller. You think about those who used to do the same. During the Great Famine in Ireland, families would gather at night and take turns describing what they would eat if they could. They'd close their eyes and build the meal course by course, down to the scent and the serving dish. Some cried, some laughed. Most fell asleep feeling strangely satisfied, even if they hadn't eaten all day. You chew a pine needle, just one, just to feel something real on your tongue, and then comes the next game. You imagine tomorrow. You describe it in detail. You'll wake to sunlight. The storm will have passed. A deer, skinny but alive, will be sniffing near your shed, and you'll scare it just right into a snare you forgot you set. You'll butcher it cleanly. You'll cook the liver first, hot, oily, rich, then the heart, then slow roast strips of meat over the fire. The smell will fill the cabin. The children will eat first, of course. You'll laugh again. You'll feel full. Your stomach makes a sound, something between a groan and a plea. You say, soon, out loud. You believe it. Sort of. You remember a study, something you once heard in a podcast or maybe read on a blog, that said imagining a meal in vivid detail can actually release dopamine, the same chemical you get from eating, that the brain doesn't always need reality, just shape, just texture, just the outline of a thing. You push away from the table and start pacing, slowly, legs trembling but still functional. You count your steps. You do a few slow stretches, nothing dramatic, just to remind yourself that you still exist from the neck down. Then you start building a fire, not for food this time, but for light, for warmth, for ritual. You feed it one log, then another. You sit beside it, hands outstretched, and speak softly. Just one more day, you say. You say it again, because the line between holding on and giving up is thinner than people think. Sometimes it's just one fire, one story, one imaginary meal. You tell yourself, I can survive without food, but I can't survive without hope. Tonight you'll dine on pretend potatoes. Tomorrow, who knows? Maybe deer, maybe spring, maybe just another fire and another lie. But for now, it's enough. You dream of snow and firewood and something unrecognisably sweet. Not sugar exactly, but that phantom sweetness. The kind your brain manufactures in the middle of starvation, just to keep you sedated. In the dream, you're holding something in your hands, warm and sticky, and biting into it slowly. Your mouth waters so vividly that you almost choke. But when you wake up, all you're holding is a bit of fabric from your blanket, chewed damp in your sleep. You let it fall from your mouth and lie there, blinking into the pale light, dazed and disoriented. The dream is already dissolving. Today feels different. Not better, not worse, just off. The air is heavy. The light outside has that still, bluish quality that means the temperature dropped hard overnight. You peel yourself out from under the blankets, every joint resisting, and start your daily rounds. Check the snowpack, melt some for water, inspect your supplies, remind your body that it's still on a schedule. There's barely anything left. One last thin film of rice scraped from the bottom of the sack, a half biscuit of bark flour, now more mould than wood, one pine needle sachet. You stretch carefully and decide. It's time to go further. You've scoured every inch of your clearing, every tree, every squirrel stash. But you remember, distantly. A line of broken down cabins about a mile into the woods, relics from when logging was still a thing up here. Half-collapsed structures, probably empty. But maybe not. Maybe someone else gave up and left something behind. You're not hopeful, just determined. You pack the little food you have, plus the tin cup, the axe, and a coil of rope, just in case. You leave the cabin carefully. No sign of visitors since the sled, no footprints near the door. But you check anyway. You've learned not to trust peace. Not out here. The cold is sharp but clear. No wind. The snow crunches under your feet in a familiar hollow rhythm. You walk slowly, pacing yourself. Your breath leaves white ribbons in the air. Each step is calculated. You're not in a rush. You can't afford to be. The forest is quiet in that eerie winter way. No birds, no movement, just the occasional crack of distant ice. You follow the faint path you once knew, guided mostly by instinct and muscle memory. You pass a frozen stream coated in thick white and a line of bent trees that lead downhill toward the clearing, and then you see them, the cabins. 3, maybe 4, though 2 a little more than are piles of rotting timber. The third still has part of a roof. The fourth is surprisingly intact. Leaning, yes, but whole. A door still hanging by a single hinge. You approach slowly, axe in hand. No footprints, no smoke, no noise. Good. You step inside, and for a moment it's just darkness and the heavy scent of old wood and frozen rot. But then your eyes adjust, and you spot it. A shelf. On it, a row of dusty jars, some broken, some sealed. You exhale sharply, blinking hard, like the image might disappear. You move closer. 3 jars, all intact. Inside, beans, dried, shriveled, precious. One even holds something yellow, corn maybe? You lift it and feel the weight. Real. Not just empty glass. There's also a rusty tin of something unlabelled, and a bundle of wax paper tied with twine. You untie it gently. Inside, dried mushrooms, brittle but unmistakable. You sit down hard on the dirt floor, clutching the jars like trophies. You can't laugh. You don't have the energy. But your lips twitch into something close. You found food. Not a feast, not salvation, but real calories. Protein, carbs, texture, things you don't have to imagine. You pack it all carefully and start the walk back faster now. You don't care how tired you are. The adrenaline is doing the work. You glance behind you now and then, not out of fear, out of instinct. As if this kind of luck has a cost. Back at the cabin, you light the fire immediately. You set the pot to boil. You start with the beans, soaking them first, even though it takes time. You know better than to rush. You've waited this long. You eat a few of the mushrooms raw, chewy, woody, but your mouth doesn't care. It weeps. Your stomach twitches. Your eyes water. It's like your body is relearning what it means to expect food. Real food. You spend the next hour cooking. Slowly. Stirring the beans in salted water, adding pine needle tea. You even find a pinch of crushed bark flour to thicken it, to give it that stew-like quality. It doesn't smell good, not exactly, but it smells like survival, and while it cooks you sit beside it and think, not about the cold or the sled, or the line you've been towing between humanity and hunger, but about Siberia, because it's the place that comes to mind first when you think of extremes, of human limits. You remember reading about the gulags, how prisoners there survived on soup made from grass, bark, sometimes fish heads if they were lucky. The guards were often just as hungry as the inmates. Some prisoners learned to trade boiled water for favours, claiming it was broth. Others boiled their own boots, just like you did. And some, only a few, found ways to steal from the guards' kitchens. Just a handful of beans, just enough. There was one man, a survivor, who wrote that the secret to surviving Siberia was simple. Eat anything you can, talk to no one, and never stop walking. You wonder if you've followed that advice without meaning to. You stir your pot and think of the forest around you, the old cabins, the forgotten stores. You're not the first person to starve here. You won't be the last. But tonight, you're not starving. Not exactly. The beans finish cooking. You eat them slowly, reverently, chewing each one as if it's a prayer. And it feels like prayer. Warm, heavy, real. You finish the bowl, you sit back, and for the first time in weeks you believe you might actually make it through. The wind changes the next day, not dramatically, not with force, but with a shift in scent. You notice it as soon as you crack the door to scoop snow. Something in the air that doesn't belong. Something animal. Not wet fur or musk, but meat. Not fresh. Not cooked. Not quite rotten either. Just wrong and familiar. You pause in the doorway, snow creeping in around your boots. Breath clouding the air like smoke. That scent, what you're afraid to name, it crawls into your nose, clings to your tongue, plants itself in the back of your throat. It's the kind of smell that tells your body to prepare. Not to run, not to fight, but to hide. You step outside slowly, following the scent without wanting to. Not far, just to the tree line. You scan the edge of the woods, ears tuned, pulse steady, as if you're tracking something invisible. A few animal tracks curve near the cabin, fox or rabbit, but that's not it. You know the smell of predator and prey. This is neither. This is what comes after. You move in small loops around the clearing, your eyes scanning for any hint, any sign. The snow is thick enough to cover most disturbances, but then, there, half melted and refrozen, is a depression. Long, too long for an animal. And next to it, drag marks. Your stomach tightens. You know what you're looking at. They brought someone back here, or left someone, and not for a burial. You follow the trail further into the woods, heart thudding. The scent gets stronger. It clings to the trees like old smoke. And then you find it. A fire pit. Cold now. Blackened stones. Ashes packed with snow. Nearby bones. Split open. Picked clean. Not deer bones. You've butchered a deer before. These are different. You kneel slowly, stomach turning. There are teeth marks. You don't look too closely. You don't have to. The knowledge is already curling in your gut like spoiled milk. They didn't leave. The sled you saw days ago, those men, they didn't just pass through. They stopped. Maybe close. Maybe closer than you realized. Maybe they came back at night when you were asleep and camped just beyond the trees. Maybe they watched you. Maybe they're still watching. You stand, suddenly aware of your own heartbeat. You should go, but you don't. Instead, you crouch by the fire pit and stare into the ashes. The ancient part of your brain whispers, they survived. Whatever line they crossed, it kept them walking. It gave them strength, calories. You think of their eyes, hollow but focused. You think of how they looked at your cabin, how they chose to knock instead of kick the door in. You wonder what you would have done if they'd asked to come inside. You know what they would have done if you had food and they didn't. And now, for the first time, you're wondering something else. Not would I ever, but could I? You walk back to the cabin with that thought following you like a second shadow. You relock the door. You close the curtains. You build the fire higher than usual as if flames could chase the thought out of your skull. But it stays. It lingers while you warm the beans again, adding melted snow and bark flour. It echoes while you sip your thin tea. It pulses while you sit by the fire, staring into the orange light like it might blink back. Because the truth is, the worst stories of famine didn't always come from cruelty. They came from calculation. From people weighing the math of survival. 1 body equals 1 month of food. That's the kind of logic winter forces on the human brain. You remember the stories of Stalingrad, of desperate civilians boiling leather and paper, then watching the neighbours go quiet. People died with food in their pockets, unwilling to become the meal. Others, less reluctant. There's a case from 19th century Canada, Franklin's lost expedition, where men frozen in ice were later found with marks on their bones, clean and deliberate. They'd resorted to it long before they had to. The cold hadn't killed them. Hunger hadn't killed them. Hope had killed them. The hope that maybe someone was coming, that they just had to hold out a little longer. You wonder if you're close to that edge now. You haven't seen another person in over a week. Your food is gone again. The last mushrooms are brittle dust. The pine tea is weak and barely warming. The dreams are getting stranger, louder, with voices that aren't yours. And that smell, that terrible lingering smell, and you can still taste it. You lie down that night and feel your bones pressing against your skin like a warning. You curl in on yourself, not from cold, but from fear of what else might be in you now, not physically but mentally. An idea, a virus, a seed. That thought, could I? You whisper no into the blanket, then not yet, then nothing at all. Because what no one tells you is that the hunger isn't the hardest part, It's the silence that comes after. When your body stops protesting and your mind starts negotiating. You're not sure how long you'll last, but tonight you sleep with the axe beside your bed, and your eyes open every time the wind shifts. The thaw arrives like an afterthought. No trumpets, no golden sunrise, just a slow drip. First one, then another, tapping the roof in a rhythm so subtle you almost miss it. But you hear it. Through your sleep, through the ache in your limbs, it finds you. A new sound, not wind, not snow cracking under weight, water, moving, alive. You blink awake in the same tangle of wool blankets and smoke-drenched clothes, but something is different. The air isn't as sharp. It smells, if you can believe it, wet. Not damp in the way rot smells, but rich and muddy, like soil waking up under the snow. You shift beneath the covers, each movement stiff and slow, but you're alert. You're listening. Because after all this time, change doesn't feel like joy. It feels like suspicion. Still, the drip keeps going. Louder now. Melt. Somewhere above, ice is letting go. You push yourself up, joints crackling, and move to the window. You rub away the frost with your sleeve and squint into the light. Grey skies still, but brighter. The trees so long pressed under white weight look thinner now, lighter. And the snow around the cabin, slumped, sagging, heavy with its own undoing. You spot patches of brown earth peeking through in the shadowy places near the firewood stack. That brown looks like a miracle. You almost laugh. Almost. You don't waste time. You step outside, bundled but quick, moving like a prisoner let out for an hour of sun. The snow crunches underfoot, but it sinks now. It's losing its stiffness. You look up, tree limbs dripping, roof lines gleaming, the edges of everything starting to glisten. You lift your face and close your eyes. It doesn't feel warm, not yet, but it feels less cold, and that's enough to stir the wildest thing in you. Hope. You begin walking the perimeter, checking the familiar places, but your eyes aren't scanning for danger anymore. They're scanning for life. And then, like some ridiculous fairy tale twist, you spot it. A sprout. Tiny. Pale. Fragile. Poking out from the base of a tree where the snow has pulled back. A weed, maybe. A stubborn seed from last fall, but it's green and alive. You crouch next to it like it's holy. You don't touch it. You just stare, hands resting on your knees, breathing fog over the little thing. It doesn't even have leaves yet, just a stem, but it's standing. You whisper, "I see you." And suddenly, the quiet is no longer empty. It's anticipation. The world is holding its breath. You hurry back inside and take inventory again. Not of food this time, but of tools. You sharpen the blade of your small spade. You find a scrap of cloth to use as a pouch. You get ready, because today you're going foraging, for real. The ground is still frozen in places, but you dig where the snow has retreated. It's messy work. Your hands go numb. You scrape your knuckles on roots, but you smile, because buried beneath all this is the stuff you've been dreaming about for months. Roots, shoots, bitter greens, anything edible, anything fresh, and nature, bless its weird little timing, delivers. You find wild garlic, sharp-smelling bulbs tucked low in the dirt. Some are still too small, but you pull 3 that look ready. You find burdock root, deep and stubborn and tough to clean, but real. You stumble upon something even better, dandelion crowns, just starting to form. You pluck the young leaves, tender and bitter. They'll cook down beautifully. You return to the cabin triumphant, hands filthy, knees soaked, face wind-burned. You boil water and drop in your finds, just enough to blanch them, to wake up the flavours. The scent that fills the room is weirdly emotional. Green. Bitter. Alive. You eat slowly, chewing each bite like it's a conversation with spring itself. You savour the crunch, the sting, the way your tongue flinches at the bitterness, but then adjusts, welcoming it. Your stomach grumbles in confusion. It's been on bark and broth and memory for too long, but now it's being reminded of what food used to be. You sit back after the last bite, full, not in the physical sense, but in that rare emotional way, like something is ending and beginning at the same time. Outside, the trees keep dripping, a slow percussion of melt water. You swear you can hear birds in the distance. Not many, just 1 or 2. But enough to make you step outside again. Barefoot this time, feet pressed against the cold earth, just to feel something raw and real. You close your eyes and listen. You remember all the times history said this moment would never come. In 1600s Russia, when a string of failed harvests led to mass starvation, people believed the snow would never melt again. That spring was a myth, a story the sky had forgotten. Some villagers even built wooden suns to hang in the streets, hoping to trick the season into changing. You don't have to trick anything. Spring is coming, slow, uneven, reluctant, but it's coming. And with it, hope, once again, with dirt under its fingernails and a garlic bulb in its hand. You step back inside, already planning what you'll try tomorrow. Nettles, more garlic. Maybe even check that old stream for watercress if it's thawing. You feel your mind shifting gears, no longer obsessed with surviving. Now you're thinking about living. Tomorrow, you tell yourself, you'll build a new snare. Check for fish at the edge of the meltwater. Boil more greens. Start your journal again. Because you're not just counting days anymore. You're planning meals. You're thinking in flavours. You're hungry, yes, but this time in a good way. You're sitting by the window again. This time not to watch for danger, not to track snowdrifts or count footprints, but just to feel the sun on your face. It's weak sunlight, hesitant and thin, but it's real. No longer filtered through clouded frost or bouncing off blinding white. It has colour now, warmth. You tilt your head toward it like a houseplant and close your eyes. You made it. You haven't said those words out loud yet because it feels dangerous to believe it. Like the moment you speak them, winter might claw its way back in and laugh in your face. But it's true. You're still here. Your ribs still show, your boots are still wet, but you've crossed something invisible, and the world is unfolding again piece by piece. The snow is patchy now. Puddles collect on the ground during the day, and at night they freeze into slick sheets of ice you've slipped on more than once. But even the slipping feels like progress. You're moving again. Out. Around. Forward. You've foraged more greens, dandelions and sorrel, tender shoots of fireweed that sting the tongue but go soft in the pan. You even found fiddleheads yesterday, curled and stubborn and still coated in dirt. You boiled them 3 times like you remember reading just to be sure. You ate them with your fingers, hunched over the pot, laughing through your chewing because they tasted green. Aggressively, defiantly green. And today you found an egg, one perfect, pale blue egg in a shallow nest behind the shed, left by some brave, confused bird who decided the thaw meant business. You didn't eat it right away. You just stared at it in your palm for a long time, stunned that something so fragile and absurd could appear after all that suffering. Then, with shaking fingers, you cracked it into a pan with a little melted snow and stirred it gently until it thickened. Scrambled, barely. It tasted like light, like memory. The hunger is still there, of course. Your body doesn't forget months of starvation in a few bites of greens and the occasional miracle egg. But now it's a different kind of hunger, one that feels natural, like a tide rolling in instead of an undertow dragging you down. You feel cravings again, cravings that mean you're alive. A warm potato, a thick slice of bread, apples, cheese. The kind of food you used to complain about for being too plain. You remember stories from World War II survivors, how they would talk about food for decades after the war ended. How a single can of peaches eaten during liberation could bring a grown man to tears 50 years later. You get it now. Every bite of real food is a return, a resurrection. A reminder that your body wasn't built to disappear, it was built to come back. You're not just eating now, you're cleaning. Slowly, with effort. But you've swept out the corners of the cabin, wiped soot off the windows, even washed your hands in a melted snow for no reason other than it felt civilized. You've patched holes in your coat, hung your boots near the fire to dry instead of leaving them in a heap. Because you're not just surviving anymore, you're reclaiming yourself. It's strange, this kind of rebirth. There's no parade, no music, no banner across the sky announcing your victory. Just you, and the trees, and the puddles where the snow used to be, and the ghosts. Because yes, they're still with you. You still see them. Those memories that kept you alive through the dark. The imagined children, the whispered promises, the versions of yourself you became just to keep moving. You see them sitting quietly around the table sometimes, fading in and out of the corner of your vision. They don't speak anymore, but you nod at them, grateful. Because here's the thing no one tells you about starvation. When it ends, the silence doesn't leave right away. It stays, humming in your bones, reminding you where you've been. You carry the memory of hunger like a scar under your skin. You forget what it's like to feel full without guilt. You flinch when you see a nearly empty cupboard, even when you know there's food on the way. You remember what it was like to dig through snow with bare fingers, to chew bark and pray it wouldn't make you sick, to set an empty bowl on the table and pretend. You remember every moment your body begged and your mind said, wait a little longer. And now you don't have to wait anymore. You look out at the trees and realise the world didn't abandon you. It just went quiet for a while. It curled in on itself the way you did and waited for the sun. Tomorrow you'll go farther. Maybe check the stream again, see if the fish are returning. You'll gather more greens. You might even light a small fire outside, just for the luxury of sitting beside it while the air brushes your skin and the birds flit nervously overhead. You'll watch for deer, rabbits, life, and you'll eat. Not scraps, not bark, not shadows. Food. And when you do, you'll remember all of it. The broth made from nothing, the snow served as dessert, the silence that sat beside you for so long it became a friend. You'll remember. But you won't go back. You stay at the window long after the sun has dipped below the trees. Not because you're worried, there's no longer that constant buzz of survival panic, but because something in you has slowed. Deeply, willingly. It's the first time in months that you've watched the sky change colour without measuring how many hours of daylight you have left to gather food or chop wood. You're not calculating anymore. You're just watching. It feels almost unnatural, this stillness, a little luxurious. You let it happen. The world outside doesn't quite look like spring yet. The ground is still too hard and the wind still has a bite, but you can feel the intent of spring, like it's walking toward you from far off, brushing its hands through the low branches, waking up frogs, warming roots, unfurling buds beneath the soil. You think about how long the earth must have waited too, how even the trees were starving in their own way. And now, everything is beginning again. Inside, the cabin is warm, not from a roaring fire, but from the soft glow of coals and the breath of wind that no longer creeps in through the cracks in the wood. You've patched most of those, cleaned, rebuilt. You even folded your blanket this morning, not because you had to, but because it felt right. Order after chaos, a little symbol that the worst is over. There's food in your belly, actual food, wild greens, a bird's egg, beans from a forgotten jar in a collapsing shack. You foraged, boiled, chewed and swallowed things you never imagined would touch your tongue. You've eaten bark and mould and broth that had more memory than substance. And still, you're here. You made it through a season where people have historically vanished. Not just physically, but completely. Lost in stories, in folklore, in warnings. You've joined a strange, quiet lineage. People who have stared down a winter that tried to erase them. People who clung to reality with frostbitten fingers and whispered to themselves in the dark just to keep their minds from unspooling. And now, you carry that legacy. You carry the knowledge that hunger isn't just a physical sensation. It's a force that rearranges your thoughts, tests your morality, strips away identity until only your will remains. You know the taste of desperation, the smell of imaginary meals, the cold, calculated silence of a mind negotiating its own limits. You know what it's like to wake up with your ribs hurting from the inside and wonder if you still have enough in you to try. But you also know the first scent of melting snow, the taste of garlic bulbs ripped from half-frozen ground, the weight of a perfect egg cradled in your palm like a second chance. That's what survival does. It doesn't hand you triumph, it hands you tiny, absurd miracles, and the option to go on. You don't know what comes next. The snow will melt, the animals will return, and so will the people, eventually. Some will arrive full of stories, others will arrive broken, some might not arrive at all, but you'll still be here. And when you look around at the food you've gathered, the tools you've rebuilt, and the way your own body has begun to feel like yours again, you'll remember. This wasn't just about outlasting the cold. It was about refusing to disappear. So when someone asks, maybe next year, maybe 20 years from now, what people used to eat in the dead of winter when food was gone and the cupboards were bare and the cold wouldn't let go, you'll smile, and you'll say, whatever it took, and you'll mean it. Now, the fire is low, your stomach is full enough, and the silence has become gentle again, so lie back. Breathe deep. You survived. Sleep easy now.